A man was making his way through the fire, his eyes sparkling white, a weapon clutched in his hands. He jumped up in a scream, opening his mouth, swinging a sharp blade, power flowing behind his back. The meteorite strike was powerful and destructive. The man himself was shocked by the force that escaped. The blades met in a duel. The first mocked the second man, eye to eye. A tense battle. The tense forehead and the appearance of wrinkles on the face of the red-haired guy, who was clenching his teeth, trying hard to fight back, beads of sweat rolling down his face. The fair-haired young man, on the contrary, was calm and determined. The clear look of his blue eyes and quiet words about his turn. A swing in the white power sparkled with a bright, blinding light and poured towards the man, dividing them into two sides. This is the story of the excluded hero, who is now fighting, all sparkling with white light from the power. One day, many plants and animals on planet Earth turned into monsters. Their eyes lit up red. Previously harmless representatives of animals and plants now opened their mouths and flashed with rage. And from different dimensions came invaders, entities that were strong and not subject to emotions. Bright flames of power flew out of their hands. Their eyes shone with power, and there was an all-consuming confidence in their own rightness. Now the world is experiencing an era of great chaos. People who did not have any powers in fear tried to run away and hide from monsters. The open mouth let out a last pitiful squeak, and lightning flashed and cut the terrible face into two parts. To fight anarchy, humanity created a guild that could defeat the monsters and ensure peace on Earth. Several strong people with special powers stood up to defend themselves. Their strength was too great. A squad of heroes with special abilities that repelled attacks from various creatures, including the field boss. The man with red power struck the huge monster, which could have crushed him in its jump. He clenched his teeth. The man was covered in beads of sweat from concentration. He cursed. He didn't understand why such power was hidden in this beast. A man from the Kiro's Guild, Javier, was actively fighting in the boss battle. Steel was ringing and sparks were flying everywhere. He glanced sideways. His sharp gaze pierced the danger. He couldn't block it. He was confused even for a moment. Again, the bright red color flashed. They clashed in battle. The defender of people and the monster clashed. The guild's support, represented by the young guy Jack, also gritted his teeth and took the blow. He shouted loudly, turning his head. His body was trembling, and shouted a signal to act. Lightning flashed white, and the girl, covered in discharges, screamed that she knew what she needed to do. She screamed, opening her mouth, and the scorching thunder moved towards her, all in light, enveloping her. The red-haired girl smiled, raised her hand to her face, and slyly asked how it seemed. Mage Samantha, smug and confident in her powers, because he would never survive his scorching thunder, roared the monster. And she was surprised that he managed to break free, and now his clawed paw was rushing towards her. But that same support was able to carry the girl away from the blow, holding her tightly to itself. She cried out in amazement, looking at the creature, which didn't have a scratch on it. But this trick still helped them buy time. The main damage was done by Mia, her hands tightly clasped, her eyes flashing yellow. The girl, waving a sharp, curved dagger, rushed towards the monster, speeding up each time. A quick blow was dealt, and the forgotten creature screamed, its eyes filled with yellow light flashing. The girl did not notice any fears when the horned monster slowly approached her, growling. But she only glanced sideways, raised her finger up, and it lit up with a yellow light. And then a man landed on the creature, lightning fast, not even giving it a chance to look around, and landed covering it with his body. He used a meteor strike on him. The guy leaned his hand on the huge sword, and with a slight movement he noticed that they were in a dungeon. The team was undefeated, took first place. The leader Kim announced that the boss was killed. Everyone was jubilant and happy about this. The girls raised their hands and smiled. Only one person stood to the side and sadly watched the guild. His face was all scratched up. The young black-haired boy was smiling. He was one of the founders of the team. At least he was until the moment when the boss called him. He leaned over and was about to say something to the boy. The man sat majestically on a throne of slain monsters. Raising his head, he called the boy's name defiantly. The next words sounded like thunder in calm weather. that he would be expelled from the guild. I couldn't quite believe it. I was clutching the bag that was hanging on my shoulder tightly, and it was drizzling. He worked like hell for 7 whole years, and all that he received, about 620,000, was now shining in his account. Then everyone laughed at him, raising their hand up. The black-haired guy didn't know what exactly he did for the team. The red-haired girl, putting her hand to her face, mockingly clarified that even a newbie could do what the couple was doing. Mia also agreed, albeit without a smile, that the boy was too weak. She couldn't complain against the team. Of course, the head made a conclusion and admitted that this team no longer needs him. Raising his head up, water flowed down his face. The character became too sad. He pressed his lips together, looking at the sky, as if looking for an answer to a question. He did not understand why he stayed in this guild. The story of this hero is coming to an end. His eyes sparkled. He can't leave all this in the blink of an eye. A green, poisonous grid appeared in front of the character. He clenched his hands into fists in determination to continue. Jack's unique ability is randomly activated in special situations. So now the character's eyes are glowing. After being expelled from Kiro's, the guy spent a whole week looking for a new guild. I sat in front of the computer all day long, ruining my eyesight, but I read and followed. As a result, after searching, I found what I was looking for. The fun guild interested the character. The eyes suddenly turned a bright blue. The mouth opened slightly and did not take its eyes off the screen. The hero didn't expect that the chances that this guild would grow into a large one if Jack joined were almost 99%. The guy's specialty was that he saw the possibility. His eyes sparkled with light and the powers seeped forward. With this specialty, he wanted to become more successful than his previous guild, promising himself. The man sat in front of the computer with headphones on. The sudden power outage was too disappointing. Suddenly, the door opened behind her. A guy appeared. She stared ahead in shock, not daring to turn around. She asked a completely natural question, clarifying who he was, but he breathed out the name of the guild. He lifted his face, completely covered in raindrops. Here he was to join the fun. Before the girl could even realize it, Jack had fallen unconscious and was surprised by this turn of events. I even tried to call the boy, but he didn't answer. He fell asleep on the floor, and he kept sleeping as soon as he fell. Suddenly, Jack jumped up in fright, backed away along the sofa, pulling his legs closer to himself. A female voice sounded, asking about the guy, turned his head and stared at her. The girl with the blonde hair of ripe wheat hurriedly announced his outage. In front of him was the guild leader, Camilla. Rubbing his head, Jack became curious about how she knew his name, narrowing his eyes. She pointed to the ID in her hand, where he was listed as a member of Kiro's, which is why the girl had questions, not understanding. He lowered his head. Beads of sweat rolled down his face, and his bangs covered his eyes. He jumped up and quickly assured her that he would explain everything now. And Camilla pointed with her hand. We sat down on the sofa opposite each other. I bowed to him, understanding the whole situation. She folded her hands under her chin and muttered thoughtfully, even addressing herself more than the guy, that her guild was small, but with his experience, he could join any. He shook his head, doubts gripping Jack. Would she believe him if he told the truth? In his mysterious ability, which the character had, but the blue eyes sparkled. The girl understood him correctly, thought that he was in no hurry to speak, so she reached for her headphones and decided that she would tell about herself. Taking the headphones off her head, she appeared before him in all her glory. Camilla was the child of an elf and a human. A half-elf, Jack cried out in shock, even leaning forward, beads of sweat streaming down his face again. After numerous battles, many species appeared in the world from different dimensions. One of them, this kind, was an elf, with red eyes and long, elongated tips of ears. The girl finished her speech and was now ready to hear the verdict from the guy. Time seemed to stop. He lowered his head, but his determined gaze was fixed on the girl. Camilla raised her head. Her eyes found the boy and did not take her gaze off him. Comprehending what was said, he noticed how his hands were shaking violently, even though Camilla was trying to scare him. And indeed, her clasped hands were nervously tapping from the trembling that had gripped her. The boy admitted that he had nothing against elves. He had even seen them a couple of times, and they were not much different from people. He laughed loudly, closing his eyes. Only bastards would discriminate against elves because they belonged to a different species. She raised her hand to her mouth. Camilla became embarrassed and her cheeks turned red. Finally, she folded her hands on her knees and stuttered that she understood him and would consider the application and contact the guy. Suddenly, the boy's attention was drawn to the scepter, which began to glow green more and more. The spirit of the sylph rose into the air. Camilla threw up her hands. The guy watched this phenomenon. The spirit slept for 12 years. The girl was very surprised. She did not understand why it was him. Jack's forehead lit up with a blue, transparent light. He also cried out in surprise, opened his mouth and watched. The girl screamed quite loudly, tried to correct the situation, and even rushed towards him, but didn't make it in time. Already on the side, Camilla looked at the glowing youth in surprise. For the first time, a sylph had made a contract with a human. This couldn't be it, the excluded hero. Jack looked at his hands full of light and power. It flowed through his veins and filled him completely. He looked thoughtfully and squeezed the power in his hand, which was now his chance to win. Thus, the boy had just obtained a super rare class that only 20 people in the world have. From now on, he is an elementalist. There are people who sign contracts with special beings and use their powers. A super rare elementalist class. They had enormous powers and could control symbols, dimensions, and planets. A black-haired man with a thoughtful look. The misty elementalist Luca, with long hair pulled back into a thick bun on his head, a frowning forehead and a large nose. The sea elementalist, Mel. The sand elementalist, Abu, is a middle-aged man wearing a white skull cap. The creatures are unusual, but each of them possesses power comparable to that of an entire guild. And now, another unusual elementalist that stood in the middle of Camilla's room was Jack. The guy couldn't take his eyes off his hands, in which a ball of power was pulsating. The unusual color was mesmerizing. Wind elementalist Jack was now holding this ball in his hand, the power flowing through his body, giving power to the guy. After the radiance, Camilla sat calmly on the sofa with a glass in her hands. The guy walked in a circle. He made a contract with the spirit. The girl explained that the contract was made with the wind spirit Sylph, and she is her late mother. Jack screamed, tried to justify himself that he was not guilty and could return it right now. Maybe he could break the contract. He was so stunned by what he heard. But the girl admitted that it was not so simple, because once the spirit had chosen its owner, it was not so easy to change it, and that will only happen when the owner goes to another world. He clenched his teeth tightly. She looked up from the glass, raised her eyes, didn't understand what else he needed, but it seemed she quickly figured it out. Rising from her seat, the test was passed. Or maybe she assumed the guy wanted to run away. His desire was sincere. He wanted to join the fun guild, and he was not interested in any other. She was confused for a moment, mentally chuckled and let go of her fear. But in reality, she said that this was a reasonable choice. Camilla laughed, her voice clear and ringing. The test passed, the check completed. Now it was time to teach how to use the spirit. But the boy stunned her. Offering to test her strength right now, she was surprised. The boy had already felt the taste of power, strength. The blue color had taken hold of him, and a check was required on the territory of monsters. There is a place where monsters of different classes and various creatures appear. The closer to the first class, the more powerful the monsters that appear become. The boy and the girl went into the area together. There was not a single soul around them. Jack was sure that the 5th-class monsters were a great opportunity to try everything out, holding his sword and hurriedly walking towards the target. Camilla with her staff kept looking back, while the guy walked straight ahead, not caring about anything. Jack saw the girl's anxiety, turned around and asked the reason for this behavior. She became embarrassed, lowered her head, and admitted that this was her first time in monster territory since training at the academy. The boy noticed that he should have warned her earlier. Camilla became even more embarrassed. She was the head of the guild, so there shouldn't be any questions here. Jack stepped over the barrier that led to the monsters, and the girl stuck her leg in after him. As we walked by, we looked at the place. There was devastation. Twisted metal was lying around, houses were destroyed. Continuing on his way, the hero asked about the type of monster that might appear here, nodded, and buried his face in his device. The creatures that may be in this place are basilisks, birds with a sharp beak and huge red wings. According to the news, About 2 weeks ago, there was an accident in which a truck carrying chickens overturned. The main character reached out and pulled out a sword. It seemed like they would be perfect for training. We've ended up in a place where blood can spill and flesh can tear at any moment, and the team now consists of 2 people. He needs to take on many roles. Camilla gritted her teeth and stared in shock at the guy walking in front. Suddenly, I stood in a stance, felt someone eating in the parking lot, and stopped. Ahead of them, a sharp bird's beak peered out from the car and held the unfortunate man, who was already half swallowed. The 5th-class basilisk noticed the people, spread its wings and turned its muzzle with prey. The aura heated up. The guy and the girl prepared for something. They put forward a weapon tightly clutched in their hand. The boy looked at the girl and shouted for her to stay behind him. Support was needed. The huge flask flapped its wings and released the prey from its beak. Seeing new victims, it hurried towards them with a cry. She rushed straight at the hero. He took out his sword and it glowed blue, not letting her near him. But something was missing in the character. So he turned to the girl again and shouted loudly so that she could hear his demands. At this time, Camilla was already concentrating her power around herself, closed her eyes, and was completely glowing blue. The bird fell a short distance away. Jack stood ready to attack, but it did not move or make any sound. He turned to the girl. He was happy with the action. She couldn't keep silent. She boasted that she was the best graduate in her class. While the characters were chatting pleasantly among themselves, they didn't notice how a shadow flashed behind the cars. Camilla raised her head, noticed something, opened her mouth, and the tips of her sharp ears twitched. The little girl screamed about the danger behind Jack, and another bird flew at him with lightning speed. Immediately after the girl's words, Jack turned around sharply to see what was there, and his eyes sparkled blue. I examined the bird, immediately identified the danger spots, carried out the diagnostics myself, without any equipment. Everything happened quite quickly. The test was over. The eye began to turn pale. I looked carefully. I needed to find a way to avoid it, calculated all the actions, made a verdict that if you bend down, then the possibility of dodging will be an average percentage. High. Sparkled all over with light. Do not rush to turn to the monster. Was stalling for time. The force gave acceleration, and immediately the boy destroyed the monster. Only the cold, white steel of the blade flashed. Jack straightened up, and behind him lay the basilisk, a bird whose wings carried fear, cut into pieces. Camilla looked stunned, amazed at how quickly the boy found a common language with the spirit. She wouldn't have believed it if she hadn't seen it herself. That he had woken up a day ago. Jack squeezed his hands. He didn't understand what kind of monster it was. He tried to understand. He decided something for himself, leaned towards the basilisk's head, lifted it, offered to receive valuable items, and she nodded in agreement. He hovered thoughtfully above his head, wondering if this would be enough or if something more was needed. He raised his head and turned around sharply, shouting for the girl to be careful. His look was frightened. A creature was rushing from behind the unsuspecting Camilla, opening its mouth and threatening to step on the unfortunate woman. He carried the girl out from under the monster, asked about her health, she said, stuttering, without taking her eyes off the huge black bird. The girl did not understand why such a monster was on the territory of the 5th level. Jack prepared for battle, blocking her with himself. The man immediately realized that this was another type of monster, but he didn't know what class it was. A huge black one with fluff on its neck and a larger wing beat than the previous one. He tried to examine it. The blue eye lit up and flashed. The boy concentrated on it. The monster was too strong. The calculated probability of victory was too small. Without turning to the girl, I asked about the slowdown, and she said, not quite understandingly, she could only slow down for a moment, but the guy no longer heard. He was in a hurry to attack the monster. His eyes sparkled blue. The bird's muzzle, seeing the guy, headed towards him, opening its beak and sticking out its long tongue, emitting a roar. The creature spread its wings. The hero was already ready to answer. Shouting out a signal to Camilla to act immediately, he rushed forward with his sword and the overthrown eye. The girl at this time concentrated her power around, holding the staff in her hands, without tearing herself away from it. The wind-slowing spell was cast, and the boy rushed forward. The monster was engulfed in a red light. The girl's strength bound the basilisk's beak with threads. The threads captured and enveloped the wings, and it could not move. Jumping high in the air, the guy swung his sword over the chained basilisk. But the spell didn't last long. He roared, and the threads disappeared. He opened his mouth with a long tongue again. The guy was already close. The hero flew straight into the open mouth of the monster. It seemed that the basilisk was about to swallow its next victim. A second before all this, the boy remembered the offensive and rude words of his former commander about his uselessness. So now he was trying to prove not only to everyone, but more to himself, that he was worth something. Using a wind cut, everything sparkled, and the monster flew into pieces. Still holding the sword in his hand that glowed blue, parts of the former basilisk swirled around Jack. A man wearing glasses was watching him, raising his finger to his face and smiling. Adjusting his sunglasses with his hand, he grinned. The man in a short shirt was surprised to see another elementalist in this city. A horde of red monsters without eyes with a huge mouth of sharp, small teeth smoothly moved towards their target. The guy put his palms together and blue light poured out. He screamed, calling the monsters closer to him. The activation of the aggression skill happened perfectly. Two strong ones met. The light spread to the sides. The man howled, turned around, and begged that he could no longer hold back and hurried the girl. While the monster was trying to attack and the guy was trying to hold him back, the girl came up and took a stance. She knew everything. The girl's face lit up with a fiery light. Her eyes sparkled, and power blazed around her. The chain lightning broke free and blew everything around, illuminating with light. The flash was strong. She laughed and scolded the others. They raised such a fuss because of these little ones standing in the center, waving a scepter in their hands. The man cried out in displeasure. He was almost touched by the irritated voice, but even then a joke escaped from the fiery beauty. Having become serious, he admitted that in any case it was worth preparing for a retreat. But then the same guy's scream was heard, and a monster rose up like a snake behind the girl's back. She didn't even suspect it and walked calmly. One of them remained alive, turned over her shoulder, flashed blue, tried to shout but stopped mid-sentence because the red creature was rushing towards her and there was no time to think about what to do. That guy is no longer on their team. The red light cut the monster in half. The girl raised her head and looked at the captain standing in front of her, the one who saved and killed the creature. With his characteristic arrogance, he looked down, narrowed his eyes, and his iron arm bent at the elbow. A long gasp of air escaped from her lungs as she leaned against the wall. The man was already sitting with his head down. Finally, without raising his head, he said that this monster was different from the usual one, and he didn't even know the variety. The red-haired lady snapped back, beads of sweat rolling down her beautiful face, not noticing anything odd. Guild leader Keros responded rudely so that no one would even dare to argue with him. An ordinary giant worm. He got angry in an instant, turned around sharply and hit the wall, not understanding the reason for this creature's fear. The boys jumped up, confused. They tried to argue. Putting their hand forward, he began to speak. The girl looked at him strangely. Fear was reflected on her face. The man tried to look away. They saw Mia walking towards them, covered in blood, with a terrible expression on her face, holding a blade in her hand. She raised her head. Her red eyes flashed. The processing of the second zone was complete, she reported. The leader turned around, whispered the name, and continued angrily that he had told her more than once not to behave as she pleased. Her forehead was cut with wrinkles. Her teeth were clenched with anger, reminding her that there was no one else here to take care of her. As if thinking, the girl responded with a calm look. Remembering this perfectly well, the rest of the guild members were shocked and couldn't believe that they were in this situation because of that boy. The man screamed, stretched out his hand forward, and roared menacingly about the impossibility. Even if he was gone, simple Jack, clenching his fists in rage, angry, head down, they didn't need someone like him anymore. At this time, the hero stood in the middle of the cut-off pieces of the snake, all glowing with blue light. Camilla brought her hand to her lips. Watching the character who was calming his light, his eye was slowly beginning to fade. But the girl was impressed. She screamed and opened her mouth, single-handedly knocked down the giant. I mentally sent a question to the guy. Who he was? He clenched his teeth, as if Jack had somehow matured and was already a man. Some guy was secretly watching them and was surprised that the two of them took out the new type of monster themselves. He grinned. His glasses flashed angrily. His hand tightened its grip on the strap of the bag hanging on his shoulder. He was glad of the gold mine. A girl ran to Jack, worried, shouting about his health, nervous that he was wounded. Before she could catch him, the guy fell down like a dark sack, waving his staff, hurrying. She sat down next to me, put her arms around my shoulders, and constantly asked about my well-being, worrying. The boy whispered, stretching out his hand to Camilla. His voice was weak and quiet. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. Jack smiled, holding out his hand, and joked, offering the girl to collect the items. Monster species are very rare. They can sell at a high price. Darkened face. She hit Camilla in the stomach with her hand, outraged by such a joke, because she was very worried. And yet, this is too much. He looked at the work of his hands. The girl confirmed, "It will be too hard for two." A voice was heard behind them. Obviously, they needed help. They turned around at the sound and were surprised. A young boy with dark hair smiled, removing the mask from his face, and greeted the guys cheerfully. He introduced himself as Channing, closed his eyes, smiled. He was from the monster processing company. The CEO continued his speech. The guys stood up and looked at each other in surprise. They had heard about this organization for recycling monster waste. Jack's face darkened. He looked over his shoulder, a little surprised that the businessman was here. Channing laughed, raised his hand, and ruffled his hair, admitting that it was a new company and that he himself had to do something similar to earn a living. He nodded his head towards the carcasses that lay behind their backs. They could leave the basilisk processing on them. Camilla greeted this news with joy. She nodded to Jack, suggested leaving it to him. The guy remained silent. The main character thought it was strange. Something was bothering him. But the guy remained unperturbed and just smiled. He sat down at the cut parts, examined them, and appreciated the good work. The meat would be expensive. The girl heard this and assumed a touched expression, rejoiced too zealously, and prepared to move to a new office. The boy was silent, but his thoughts were not good. He could leave them as much meat as he wanted. He laughed, grasping the reddish, shiny stone with his hand, found a worthy thing, and rejoiced. The thing was valuable. A magic crystal appears when a new species dies and can get rich thanks to it. But suddenly the ground opened up underfoot. The boys also protected themselves from the falling rocks, and Channing was covered as if by a dome. They didn't understand what was happening. He begged them, asking for mercy, promising to return everything that was there, including the magic stone. But the earth was pressing harder and harder. I was covered in sweat. Moisture was rolling down my face, and I heard a voice that was indignant about the impudent businessman. He tricked the guy, dared to steal someone else's item. Camilla and Jack looked stunned, not quite understanding what was happening. The same man in a short shirt and sunglasses was slowly walking towards them. The first-class hero. Don raised his hand to his head. His whole body was covered in a light yellow light, but his voice thundered, asking about the magic crystal. Camilla felt a thrill, but not understanding reflected in her eyes, because such a person from the Costi Guild was a rarity in such a place. The man's hand was tightly clutching the raised crystal, which began to crumble. The guy was in no hurry to give an answer. Jack clutched the crystal in his hands. "This thing belongs to the Fun Guild," he said doubtfully about the robbery. His eyes sparkled. He grinned. On the orders of the association, he catches this variety. But the boy did not back down. His eyes flashed. He accused that the problem was not theirs, but Don's. His eyes turned blue. The probability of winning was calculated. It was equal to 0. The man scratched his head. He noticed that apparently the guy in front of him did not understand. He jumped up, leaving a mark on the ground. Everything happened quickly. Jack remained standing in place. Don appeared behind the guy, waved his hand and thundered an answer. It was not a question asked, it was a fact stated. He grabbed the boy's face with his hand and slammed him into the ground with all his might, sending stones flying in all directions. He already had both hands on the boy's head, thus warning him. A grin appeared on his red, angry face. He turned to the elementalist. His hand began to shake. Jack's eye flashed. He tried to look, squinted. At this time, Channing, restrained by stones, was lamenting the fact that he had to meet this guy right now. Don was the most powerful leader in the Bone Guild, and there were many rumors and speculations about him. He was also the only elementalist in the entire world, a transcendental hero. Camilla pointed her staff at Don, asking in a trembling voice to let Jack go. The blue color flowed, but a voice warned her to stand still and not move. The warning hung in the air. If the girl moved, the hero would die immediately. She lowered her staff, realizing that the man was serious, and that her actions now could cause harm. The main character would argue with this. He was in no hurry to die, slowly freeing himself from the grip. The light was so bright that Don covered himself with his hands. The veins appeared on them and he recoiled. He was surprised, because the boy was definitely pressed into the wall. He chuckled, narrowed his eyes, and an attentive gaze stopped on him. He noticed with displeasure that he was also getting up. Cursed, Jack leaned his hand on his knee and was breathing heavily, but did not retreat. The moment he fell, his eyes flashed blue, summoning an element to reduce the damage. In addition, he adjusted his sunglasses, hiding the elements. The boy managed to make contact. While he was assessing the interesting boy, Jack looked at the man from under his forehead, sweat running down his face in large drops. I calculated the probability that if I continue to use elemental magic, the probability of death will be a large percentage. At the same time, the hero realized that he had spent all his remaining mana on this attack, but even it did not cause any damage. The invulnerable hero of the first class headed towards him again, adjusting his glasses. The understanding that he was not an opponent clearly penetrated the boy's head. Don walked straight to the guy. Since they had already exchanged greeting blows, he might have suggested moving straight to the second round. And he had a magic crystal in his hands. But the boy unexpectedly surprised everyone, raised his hands up, and admitted that he wanted to surrender. He was confused, put his finger up, asked again several times. But the hero decided to give up the magic crystal without further fighting. The guy gritted his teeth, got angry, doubted, couldn't believe that he was ready to violate the declaration of capitulation, argued, "It's all just entertainment." He squinted, his eyes flashed red, and listened to the approaching sound. But the members of the association arrived faster. The helicopter was approaching, and the earth rose behind the man. A girl in a black skirt and glasses held onto the handrails and shouted accusations at Don. He calmly cut him off about completing the task and scolded him for not reprimanding him immediately after his arrival. Turning towards the helicopter, hands folded in pockets, he threw to the character that they would determine the winner later, and clarified the name. Shielding himself from the wind, the boy shouted out his name and his guild. His glasses flashed, he grinned, repeated the name of the guild. Everything amused him at that moment. He shouted, still covering himself with his hands, to the guys about participating in the test for promotion to the 4th grade. Don rubbed his chin, laughed, and promised to personally recommend the hero. The character seemed surprised and asked the reason for this generosity. He had almost entered the car, but he still turned around, grinning. He just wanted to do that. I sat down more comfortably, leaned back on my hands, asked my assistant to write a letter of recommendation. The girl screamed, "The test is in 2 days and it's very difficult to send the letter already." Sweat started to run down my face as I heard that their guild was not even registered. But then the man heard a voice full of concern. She saw that there was a wound on her elbow, which surprised her. She lamented the impossible, but Don no longer heard. He was lost in his thoughts. He was happy for the first time in a long time. Later in the room, Channing begged for forgiveness on his knees, nodded his head and prayed, saying that he had made a mistake. Rubbing his hands, Jack was angry, did not want to listen to the apology, was immediately ready to give him a thrashing. The guy got scared, asked to listen to him. He raised his finger, smiled, overheard their conversation, asked about participation in the promotion to the 4th grade. He leaned forward. The test was in 2 days. It was worth changing the equipment right now. Jack asked again with interest. He noticed that the sword's service life had apparently come to an end. Suggested going to a workshop he knew. They would sort it out. Put his hand to his chest and knocked. The characters looked at each other, thought about the boy's words, and their eyes lit up with decision. Channing led the way, throwing open the doors and putting his arms out to the sides, and the boys followed behind him. Jack looked around the room. They flashed blue and chuckled. There was no one here. Camilla was angry, started to go to the boy. They won't fall for the trick, he waved his hands, arguing. While the boy was calming the already enraged children, a voice came from the darkness. The man raised his hammer and made a voice, warning menacingly that today was a day off. He put his weapon on his back, and a short man with a thick black beard inquired about their arrival. Jack and Camilla decided that the man in front of them was a dwarf blacksmith. Memories of this race immediately came flooding back. They were first-class blacksmiths. The hero had wanted to meet this race for a long time. The dwarf's weapons were of commendable quality. Channing left quietly, smiling broadly. The girl turned around and smiled, intending to praise him. The director wasn't so bad. To think that he brought them to a workshop run by a dwarf, but the boy had disappeared without a trace. Camilla looked at him and chuckled, wondering where he had gone. The man laughed, thinking it was stupid that he was mistaken for a gnome. The guy looked at him attentively. The hammer flashed in his hands. A smile lit up his white, even teeth, and he argued that he was a man. They stared at the speaker in shock, unable to believe what they were hearing. The atmosphere grew tense, as if lightning was flashing. Jack pointed his finger at him, didn't believe what he said, politely demanded to see his ID, gave in to him. He showed the card. A piece of cardboard paper flashed in his hands, and a boy looked at it, smiling. They stared incredulously. Sweat poured down their faces, shouted for the truth, and tried to pull the ID out of each other's hands. They looked at the man, whispered, considered the ID stolen, and even suggested reporting it to the police. Camilla threw her hands up to her head and screamed about that idiot Channing, who had fooled them again. And the guy calmly noted that they should call for help. The man's attention was drawn to something, and he leaned forward as if he couldn't see clearly. He asked to see his sword. Jack was surprised, asked again. His face darkened. He brought the sword to himself, looked at it. It lit up blue, and admired the marks on it. The guy raised his head, looked around carefully, asked about the wind elementalist, saw all the attacks. Jack cried out in surprise, wondering how the man knew about the marks. But he argued, saying that an experienced first-class blacksmith could guess who the owner of the sword was. Jumped up to his machine. The man asked for a minute of time. This would be the perfect weapon for an elementalist. He brought the sword, giving the guy the sword that united the elements, quickly handed it over to him. Camilla's jaw dropped as soon as she heard the name of the sword. The man named it after himself, and she was surprised. And so time flew by. The day of the promotion exam arrived. Our guys came in here, and when they opened the door, they saw a room full of people. The girl looked back and turned to the guy, but he was lost in his memories. It was too long ago. Darkening his face, he was still in the Kiraz Guild then. There were a lot of people that time too. Suddenly I heard some sound, looked around, and noticed that the man was rubbing his nose and smiling. There was a whisper that reached the guys. They didn't think that this boy would decide to show up at the exam. The whisper became louder and louder. Camilla leaned towards Jack and whispered, covering herself with her hand. She understood that they were talking about the boy. He felt relieved. People always slander each other, and there were no rumors about what happened in the city. He needed to hide the fact that he was an elementalist as long as possible. He understood that it was important to him. Nothing good would come of it if they attracted unnecessary attention. A loud voice stopped the noise. He didn't like the fact that they were making a fuss over a simple test for promotion. He asked them to calm down and continued to be rude to the people in the room, which caused Jack's eyes to glow blue. The man came closer to him, towering over him, and said sternly that they were all bad players. The fourth grade examiner was insulting people. Jack's eyes began to glow blue. But he shouldn't give himself away, he calculated, using his ability to pass the test. A low percentage, Ben towered over him. The girl reported to Don, who was sitting and making himself some tea. She shared her doubts. looking through the papers that were in her hands, reading them carefully, looking for something. At this time, the exam for promotion to the 4th grade was going very quickly. Young people were trying to cope with the task. They rushed towards Beg, who stood calmly, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a sword, and young men were running towards him from all sides. The examiner's pupils lit up red. He clenched his teeth and his jaw muscles began to clench. The first thing to do was to study Ben, attack him immediately after the battle began. Such a reckless strategy, the man thought. They are all weaklings and dumbasses. The sword returned to the belt. The eyes turned into slits where the red color burned. He again assumed the pose that was his original one, and said that this team had also failed the test, and the boys' corpses were lying nearby. 2 observers for the test. One expressed doubt that it seemed to him that he had gone too far. The girl next to him agreed. He doesn't know who can pass the exam at all. Clayton, the 4th grade examiner, laughed, amused by the whole situation. Orlana raised her hand to her head, closed her eyes, and did not understand how she could now report to her superiors. Sebastian decided to continue watching further. Now there will be the last command, he looked up. The Fun Guild flashed before my eyes, where photos of Jack and Camilla flashed. They were the last to pass the test. The guy stepped forward, staring at the hero of these heroes the head of the guild recommended. They will have a hard time, the guy thought. Jack and Camilla entered the testing room. I looked and concluded that the man who entered the hall did not have any flexibility. We entered and heard the task about the next 5 minutes of battle with Examiner Ben. The passing requirements are met at the moment when either the examiner is completely defeated or confirmation is received from him. Camilla screamed indignantly, hitting herself in the chest. She did not share the opinion that the 5th grade team needed to defeat the examiner. She could argue with that, because the forces were not equal. Jack knew that Ben had fought many teams, but he didn't have a scratch on him. The main character threw the girl to help him as well as in the territory of monsters from behind, she agreed. The character's eyes lit up with a bright light, preparing his weapon. This will not be an easy battle. He recognized Ben's strength. The guy stopped Camilla with a wave of his hand. They prepared for battle, becoming serious and focused. The battle begins right now. Jack managed to raise his blade and hold off the attack. Ben attacked immediately after it began. The fist was rushing towards Camilla, she screamed, turning to the guy, holding it with air, but it was getting closer to its target. He was very surprised when his fist turned blue, but his face remained impassive. Ben's red eyes glanced at the guy. He realized that all this was coming from him. He correctly confirmed his thoughts. Thus, having confirmed that the letter of recommendation was not fake, blue color began to flow from the character's hand towards the examiner. Ben shouted, kicking Camilla away, the girl flying to the side with a wave of air. Red eyes flashed. A sword was clutched in his hand. A man flashed like a dark shadow. The swords clashed. The guy held them with both hands, while the examiner easily and deftly controlled them with one. His strength was failing him. It was hard for Jack. He couldn't believe that a wooden sword could cause so much damage. His eyes flashed. His teeth clenched. The character was counting on increasing the distance. A crease appeared on his forehead. He released his power. The windy night flew a spell at the examiner and he flew away from the boy. After doing a somersault in the air, he pushed off the floor with his hand and returned to his original position. Leaning on the sword in his hand, he knew such a spell, understood the element of wind, thought about the annoying talent. Jack didn't think about Ben's talents, so he appeared behind him with a sword in a jump. It seemed that the examiner didn't notice him. The girl repeated her question to Dawn once again, because the written letter of recommendation would work against them. The man grinned, raising the glass of liquid to his mouth. The lenses of his glasses flashed, and an answer came from him. The swordsman, who was cutting through the air in the testing room, turned around sharply, and his face acquired a terrible expression. His features became sharper, his veins stood out. He sent several spells at Jack, alternating one after another. A whole barrage of lightning-fast blows flew at him. Having met the body, they cut the guy to pieces. He screamed. Drops of blood flowed down, and he clenched his teeth. He sank to the floor. Ben towered over him, smiling, his hands in his pockets, safe and sound after so many attacks, now looking at the hero. He lowered his head, coughed up blood. It continued to flow out of his mouth. not as fast as he had been. The main character still felt the consequences of past battles. With the basilisk and Dawn, memories flashed right there. The examiner loomed over the boy like a displeased shadow. His sharp words were rude and offensive, and he didn't keep quiet about the letter of recommendation. He warned that he would destroy the boy right now, but while drawing his spell from above, Camilla tried to act silently. She shouted for him to leave the guy alone, released a spell net at him. The blue color flared up and obeyed its owner. There was an explosion. Ben jumped back. Jack covered himself with his hand from the stones and light. Camilla appeared in front of the boy, angry and beautiful. She decided to deal with it herself, leaving the guy behind her. She had to do this. She couldn't stay forever behind Jack, his gaze expressing determination, his clenched teeth ready for battle. I calmly clarified a couple of points. The examiner called the girl stupid. He was already standing in his place and watching her, raising her hand to her hair, opening her ears, showing the sharp tip. She introduced herself as the head of the Fun Guild. Ben laughed, saw and realized that the girl was an elf. It was funny and interesting for him. Opening her mouth in a quiet scream, she rushed at the examiner, who became curious about how far she would go. Unlike the usual Mana, he became interested in her. The light scattered. Confirming his opinion about her stupidity, she stepped back, covering herself with her hand. She closed her eyes and began to dissolve into all of this. The elves could hear the flow of power, and now it had taken possession of Camilla. It seemed as if she was falling down into a black space, doing everything with her eyes closed. Suddenly light poured from the staff of light. Camilla screamed and sent a windy arrow. This absurdity made me angry. Apparently the girl thought that it would work at such a close distance. But suddenly her gaze caught on movement. He cried out indignantly that he had prepared only one blow, turned around, and easily parried it with his sword. But the air swirled behind him. His eyes narrowed, trying to concentrate. He was amazed by the weaving and the fact that the 5th grade was using such a complex skill, deftly fighting off attacks. And also the hexagonal magic unexpectedly surprised the man. The girl continued to release her magic. Covering herself with her hand, Camilla looked out, squinting. He got a good one from her, even if he was the examiner. He grinned, agreeing that the idea was good. To corner him and close the distance. A good move. The man appeared quickly enough behind the girl. Her movements were still too slow, and the sword ended up pointed at her neck. Eyes opened in realization that the man had been able to overcome the 7-sided magic. He also saw Jack, who took up his weapon and headed for the attack that Ben had been waiting for, and was standing waiting next to the girl. The guy clutched his weapon tighter. The examiner was too arrogant. This would be the reason for the defeat. Swinging his sword, but it can't absorb mana, and the hero just used it all up. He swung his sword again. Light began to emanate from it. His eye lit up with renewed vigor. He was determined to gather the rest of his strength. The wind and blades struck together. They hit, ran up and rushed forward. The guy was focused on the upcoming blow. His eyes were blazing blue, which stretched slowly. A man in a black suit stood with his hands folded behind his back and silently thought, looking out the huge panoramic window. The fair-haired young man entered the office anxiously and began to give a report on the team's status for the day. Without changing his position, he turned to look at the speaker and continued to remain silent in anticipation. He turned around and spoke in more detail about the guy who became Jack's replacement in the Kuros Guild. And the man was the head himself. He cried out, getting angry. He could not believe that such a young man as their former accomplice in the group was able to go forward. He leaned over, reading his papers. The results of the examination indicate that he is still in the adaptation stage and looks somewhat unbalanced. The boy was sweating, looking for some information about Jack. And with trembling hands, he tore out sheets of paper from his notebook. He turned around abruptly and screamed, remembering this scumbag. Outraged that this brat, who could not get a single letter of recommendation, passed the test for promotion. He froze in place and could not find the words to respond. He heard that there was a letter, and it was from Dawn. 2 black figures. One man with a glowing eye pointing a sword at the other. A crack in the floor and dust stood in the room. It was Jack, his face serious, his eye blue. But he was silent. The man laughed, wondering how he had managed to get a letter of recommendation from Don. Now the guy was pointing his sword at him as he decided to give up, hanging his head. But going to the elementalist exam was cheating. The boys, exhausted, leaned back on the sofa and exhaled, too tired. She turned to the boy. Camilla screamed joyfully. She didn't understand how he learned to use magic so quickly. I couldn't answer that question, but I definitely felt like I was getting closer to elemental magic thanks to that battle. He tore himself away from his thoughts, looked at the girl with a slight smile, praised her for being able to distract the man. He looked to the side. They still somehow managed to win the exam battle, but there was still an exam interview left. The young people left the office, saying goodbye, satisfied. The boys sat on the sofa and watched them, became interested and listened attentively, and were a little afraid of the upcoming conversation. They were invited to go inside. The examiners conferred among themselves about the previous command, and upon entering, they stopped. The young black-haired man smiled, looked through the papers carefully, and was about to let them through, but a dissatisfied voice rang out, which thickened the atmosphere around those who entered, and it was decided to exclude it. The short-haired man noticed that the guy was hesitating, analyzing their actions now. In this situation, he would definitely panic when their team was attacked. He crumpled the paper about the fourth-class guild in his hands, closed his eyes, leaned back, and exhaled irritably. Jack noticed that the examiners were talking too loudly, as if they were deliberately trying to make sure they heard him. The next interviewers were allowed to sit down and begin the conversation. They behaved in a languid and overly provocative manner. That same young lad looked at the dossier on this guild with surprise. Then he raised his head, stared at the guys in amazement. They were the only ones who passed the exam battle, and raised his hands without hiding his surprise. Jack laughed, thought the guy was flattering him, blamed it all on luck. The girl laughed. The man became bored, put his hand to his cheek, and chuckled while flatteringly praising the young people. Then he raised his hand. The head of the guild pointed his finger at Camilla, demanding to show her ears. He called the girl's hairstyle boring, who only raised her hands to her hair, revealing her ears. Camilla stared at her feet in shock, tucking her hair behind her ears, and beads of sweat were now rolling down her face. The man lit up red, an aura around him. He looked at her intently, interested in the half-elf. Sticking out his tongue, he ran it over his lips, licking his lips as if it were a treat. He clicked his tongue in disappointment. Thinking that she was a purebred, he grimaced in disappointment. The young man next to him couldn't stand it and shouted indignantly. His behavior was unacceptable. You should watch your words. The head of the guild immediately gathered and apologized to them. But his eyes betrayed his cunning, and he blamed it on habit. Jack was barely holding back. His veins stood out from the tension. He clenched his teeth. They even asked him to calm down and relax. Camilla grabbed the hero's hand, trying to quietly calm him down, reassuring him and saying that everything was fine. He bowed his head, clasped his hands on his knees, and tried to calm down. Although the man's words hurt him very much. He laughed, raised his hand, asked to continue the interview, calling for calm. But the character convinced himself that he could not give in to such provocations. The girl read the documents carefully, asked to tell more about Camille's father, and found out that he worked at the institute. Turning her head to Jack, she asked about the situation in the monster's territory, about the mutated basilisk that was defeated by the guy. She turned her head. The girl in glasses who asked questions, a new guild consisting of 2 people. She needed to hear a decision from others. Propping his chin on his hands, the leader saw for the first time in his 10 years of work that a half-elf had created a guild. The head of the guild was interested in the question. If their city were ever attacked, then whose side would Camilla be on? Her provocations were ending. The girl was confused, didn't know what to answer. Sweat was pouring down her face, but she clenched her teeth and remained silent, but didn't lower her head. I tried to answer politely and avoid answering, but he put his head on his clasped hands, looked at me with displeasure, and wanted to know the answer to his question right away. Jack couldn't stand it, clasped his hands on his knees, calmly parried with his answer. The girl turned her surprised gaze to him. He was hurt by the attacks on the head of the guild. Apparently, he didn't care at all about the promotion. His face darkened. The frightened young people at the table screamed, raised their hands, their eyes flickered, their mouths opened. They did not expect such a question, and it caught them off guard. The guild leader who was there roared, slammed his fist on the table, his face twisted in anger. It was up to them to decide. Offended by such a question, the man was carried away without hiding his emotions. So rudeness flew from his lips. A young guy jumped up to him, patted him on the back, calling for calm. The tabletop cracked from the blow. But Jack didn't keep quiet either. He roared no worse than the man and leaned forward. His eyes were starting to turn blue, and in his emotions he also shouted a refusal of the promotion, since there had been enough humiliation today. Camilla extended her hand to the guy, trying to calm him down, because they came here for a different purpose. She didn't have time. She heard Jack's words, clenched her hand into a fist, closed her eyes, and tears got stuck in the corners of her eyes. She pressed her lips, now trying to take control of her emotions. Later, sitting in her chair in her guild, the girl sipped liquid from a glass and was deeply immersed in her thoughts. Jack walked past, stopped, raised his hand to his head, apologized to her. A smile appeared on his lips, assured her that everything was fine. She looked at the whole situation from the other side. The boys stood up for her and she expressed gratitude. Since it was the first time, the girl did not know how to react. The hero stood rooted to the spot and whispered her name. But he also noticed that Camilla kept pressing the update button. And indeed, she was sitting half-turned to the computer, pressing the button every now and then, waiting. The guy apologized again. The girl turned around abruptly. She no longer heard what he was saying. She was worried about the screen. She began to read it quickly. Jack also leaned over with curiosity, holding his breath as they looked at the screen. They suddenly looked at each other with incomprehension. And when they finished reading, they silently understood each other. The examiners were discussing the case in the room. The man was standing near the window and rolling an apple in his hand. The question asked by the girl remained unanswered. He apologized for his behavior in the morning, without turning to face the others in the room, thinking. He started throwing the fruit again, grinned, went a bit overboard, but curiosity got the better of him. He cursed. Veins appeared on his forehead. Saliva appeared on his lips. The apple was bitten off, and the man's thoughts revolved around the fun guild. I wanted them to climb up. The guys kept staring at the computer screen, didn't know how it happened. And they did it. People crowded in front of the bus, holding up banners and shouting joyfully to welcome the guild. The men got off the bus. The Keras team was too pompous. The organizers were bustling around and letting them go ahead. The angry guy pushed the girls who were climbing up to the heroes, screaming and wanting to see and touch them. Already cursing and swearing, he pushed them away. But the hand of the guild leader stopped the boy. He corrected him with a smile, narrowed his eyes, and seemed to sincerely care about his fans. Then, still smiling, he thanked the girls for coming to support them, and under the guise of concern, asked them to stay away. The group left. The leader did not forget to wave to people. Everyone who came to watch and support was delighted with them, shouting at their backs and wishing them luck. But as soon as they crossed the border into the territory of the monsters, the mask of goodwill slipped from the leader's face. He became gloomy, and muttered discontentedly that the scum were noisy and getting on his nerves. The black-haired guy turned his head and agreed. There were more people today than yesterday. They could only be surprised at their quick appearance. The voice behind Hunter mentioned the woman at the entrance, turning to him, listening carefully. The boy in the cap pressed his fist to his mouth and burst into laughter, spoke unflatteringly about the woman, and continued to judge her ugliness. He didn't lag behind the leader. He continued asking about the girl's taste. The rest of the team members already started looking at him sideways. He stopped, narrowed his eyes, and almost proudly announced that he would be bringing a few pretty girls with him this weekend, and suggested going to a club with them. The girls were outraged by the behavior of the newcomer. They are right there and don't like the discussion. But he winked playfully at the girl and suggested that she go with them. She was confused and didn't understand the reason. Her cheeks turned red just hearing about the male models who were eager to meet her. He laughed. His eyes turned into slits. He persuaded her to invite handsome guys, but he himself thought that it was easy. He just had to persuade her and the girl would fall for it. But he glanced at Mia, who was walking with her arms folded across her chest, and he didn't know what was on her mind. He had no idea. Turning around, the girl asked about the newcomer, who abruptly turned away from her and shook his head. Guildmaster Kiraz glanced over his shoulder at his team, the boys' babble reaching his ears. Young people walked up to them, waving their hands cheerfully, smiling and showing good nature. The guild stopped in front of them. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, several months since the last meeting. The leader agreed. The man with the scar on his face showed interest in the boy who was with them. He repeated his question about the boy who was carrying things, and the chief glanced over his shoulder at the newcomer. He explained that he had left the team, and now there was a newcomer with them who had recently joined them. The boy introduced himself and stated his role. The man was genuinely upset. The leader was surprised by such behavior. His red eyes flashed, and he asked the reason. Then the boy remembered what kind of help Jack had given about a year ago. It was help within his power. Even when he thought about it now, his movements at that time were not a joke. He moved well, and it was amazing, having such a bag on his back. He asked the head of the Kiros Guild for contacts. He wanted to add Jack to his guild. They would take him for themselves, he waved his hand. The man turned away. They wished him luck as he walked away. But he was already silent, lost in thoughts about how Jack had been spoken of well and called incredible. The newcomer couldn't stand it and spoke up, grimacing. He heard that the guy was always spinning his legs, and those people overestimated him. But he interrupted the voice, demanded the sword, narrowed his eyes, raised his hand, completely confused and did not understand what he wanted from him. The head turned around, demandingly holding out his hand in anticipation. And behind him grew the face of a monster with an open mouth. The sword in the man's hands jumped into the air and caught fire. He swung it and was ready for battle. The hero plunged into the battle. His eyes sparkled red. He saw no one and nothing. People were running without their things. They didn't understand what was happening. The guard was leading them, not really understanding it himself. But he quickly came up with an answer. The territory was marked as a fourth-class monster territory, and we needed to evacuate immediately. One man was running, putting on his jacket as he went, worried about the price of the house. Another was worried about the child he was holding. Camilla looked at the phone, reading the information. There should be a saber-toothed cat here. Jack carefully looked around the place. A huge cat with sharp teeth jumped on people, its mouth open and drooling down. The main character rushed into battle against the monster, taking out his weapon on the go and turning to his girlfriend. The girl was already glowing blue, carefully weaving a spell, concentrating on the movement and the monster. The boy did not see her or hear her. He ran, attacking his target, his movements dexterous and honed. His eye glowed blue, and the dagger entered the cat, cutting it into two parts. The sword was already in his other hand. Camilla assessed the possibilities. They were easy. She thought it was too early for them, but it was easy. The type of basilisk they fought earlier was different. The girl looked at the cat's corpse and wondered how they would drag it to the first floor. The guy even suggested calling a monster recycling company, but the boys turned sharply towards the voice asking for help, heard the call, and froze for a moment. They ran very quickly. Camilla assumed that there was a person left here who had not evacuated. The hero hurried to save him. Sweat broke out on his forehead. The voice seemed too familiar to him, and worry was reflected on his face. Peering out from around the corner, they shouted, introduced themselves, asked about their health, and looked intently. The guy was crying, and his tears were running down his cheeks, was shoved into the mouth of a monster. It was Channing. Camilla put her hands to her cheek. A blush painted them. An unexpected meeting, blamed on fate. The girl screamed quite loudly, put her hands on her hips, but the boy dumped everything on his stomach. Jack folded his arms across his chest and smiled, suggested that they end it there. They were able to get a good weapon thanks to the boy. She cried out indignantly, accused him of being kind. He surprised Channing with the following words about wanting to sign a contract with him for processing monsters. He raised his hand. Jack continued. Despite the bad start, admitted that the abilities were quite good. Stutteringly agreed. Running away, only the heels of Channing sparkled. He shouted on the go, giving instructions about the bodies in the building. Camilla closed her eyes, clearly dissatisfied. She didn't believe in the boy's sincerity. But for some reason, she was confident that everything would be fine. The character had just started to speak when he fell silent and heard the cries of people asking him to stop hunting innocent creatures. The man shouted loudly into the microphone, calling for life, and the crowd echoed him. Camila also looked in that direction, opened her mouth. These were the monsters' defenders. They claimed that monsters could coexist with people like ordinary plants and animals. The girl turned to the guy. She was interested in knowing his opinion, but he didn't agree with him. I'm sure it would change if these people saw how creatures kill people right before their eyes. They tried to push them away, but people resisted, calling on everyone to stick together and fight back. The crowd managed to break through. Now they had to push them and enter. People ran to the guys who were confused and did not move. Jack looked around and noticed how the men were clutching the bat tightly in their hands. The guy looked back at the girl, clinging to her, not understanding what was happening and why they were surrounded by a crowd. The girl raised her hands to her head and screamed as soon as she saw the dead monster. The men nearby also darkened. She sat down next to him, tears streaming down her face, sobbing bitterly, asking for forgiveness for all human beings. Turning to them, they began to scold them for the death of the animal, swearing, calling the heroes bastards. Jack, his eyes sparkling, listened attentively. They were very angry, unfortunately. The heroes were not allowed to touch ordinary people. They would have to wait for help from the association. But suddenly a thug appeared in the crowd, appeared behind the men, and loudly announced the matter to the character. The guy turned around, looked, exclaimed. He didn't like that another one of the heroes had appeared. He smiled, revealing all his white teeth, a light golden light emanating from him, and greeted everyone, reminding them of his name. He appeared in all his glory before a crowd of indignant people, and they began to whisper about the Earth Dragon. Someone called him a clown. His smile turned into a grin. The pupils of his glasses sparkled. Adjusting his glasses with his middle finger, he loudly declared for all to hear that he preferred the nickname Scoundrel. The men in the crowd shouted, looking at each other in alarm. They knew this first-class hero. Jack's face darkened. He lamented the fuss that had been raised around him, and he didn't particularly like the person who was the cause of it. He stood in front of the crowd of people and sternly commanded them that it was time to return. Smiling, looking at the men who were in fear in front of him, he added a place for them in hell. He called his animal, and a huge, fiery mouth appeared next to the man. Jack gritted his teeth. His face was covered in sweat. He didn't understand what was happening. He cursed through clenched teeth. Don gave the command to the earth elemental to grab the people. Still the same pose, but the obedient dog rushed. The people screamed and began to run away from the elemental in horror, constantly looking back to see if it was following them. But the tenacious threads from the earth dragon held the guys firmly in the air, who groaned and tried to get out. Don, hands on his hips, looked menacingly at the boys, his back tensed. They cried out, perplexed. He was a hero and shouldn't behave like that. The guys covered themselves from the dust with their hands. Camila covered herself with her hand. She was incredibly surprised. Jack also looked a little surprised. Don, his glasses flashing, told the news and about the exam for promotion to the 4th grade. A thought flashed through Jack's mind, and he fought with such a monster. The boy thanked him because he had appointed an excellent examiner and cheerfully egged the man on. Don laughed out loud, admitted with his hands on his hips that the boy was a bit hot-tempered. Sad thoughts visited the hero. He almost died. He lowered his head. In any case, he praised that the character probably became stronger. He even became interested. The aura of a first-class hero lit up red, towering over Jack. It was time to find out who would be stronger. The young man's eyes lit up with a dangerous blue color. He continued calmly and exhaled. He turned to the young people, heard gossip and arguments behind him. Camila screamed about the other guild members. Raising his head, Don expressed his opinion about too many eyes being here, even suggested moving to another place. The construction was in full swing. A man in a hard hat kept a list and watched other people, but seeing the first-class hero, everyone began to greet him. Casting glances to the sides, the man paid attention to everyone. Jack looked around, realized that this was the headquarters of the Dice Guild quarters, and noticed that there were a lot of people here. Upon hearing this, The man agreed that they were working on expanding the underground training complex and asked for patience. The young men followed the guild leader, slowly turning their heads and looking around the area. Jack passed through the blue border, penetrating into the building, his eyes flashing with a bright light. The sounds of construction died down. Camilla smiled widely and sincerely admired the room. The delight was connected with such a huge dome of magic. She estimated how much money was spent. In response to the guy's question, she screamed, pointed her finger, and named a sum that shocked him. They turned around at the sound of the voice, and behind them stood a black-haired girl who thanked them for their delight. Adjusting her glasses with her fingertips, the girl smiled. She was pleased that there was interest. And Deputy Head Jenny also named the price of this building. The guys were confused. They looked at each other. They thought that Dawn was the deputy. They thought that the girl was an ordinary secretary. The leader approached quietly, greeted Jenny, asked her to prepare everything for the meeting. She laughed and agreed to help. But then her face changed. She clutched her cheek with her hand, screamed, and scolded the man who had ignored the schedule and gone somewhere. Jack watched the show, his thoughts wandering around the head, not liking the noise, no matter if they were outside or inside. Afterwards, they sat down in soft chairs. The leader clutched a glass in his hands. The guys tensed up in anticipation. Don lowered his head and looked at the glass, eventually leading the young people to the reason for the invitation. Jack darkened, turned his head, expressed his guess, and stared from under his forehead in anticipation. He agreed, and immediately everything around was illuminated by a bright yellow light that blinded. The Fun Guild froze with their hands folded on their knees. Unexpectedly for everyone, the elemental of dawn, a fiery dog, appeared. The guy stared at him, the first-class hero, smiling and warmly patting his elemental on the head, introduced him to everyone. The boy immediately remembered him recently, and what form it was last time. Too big a difference, he agreed, stunned. The dog turned to his owner, tried to get rid of him, referring to a bunch of things to do with the construction site. But Don assured him that there would be a short delay. The elemental Moo turned to Jack with interest. The boy waved his hand and said, "Hello." He ran up to the young man and nuzzled his hands. Camilla sat there, clenching her fists in emotion and delight. While the girl continued to pour out rays of love, Don asked to release the boy of his elemental, to show him, and nodded in agreement. A round, bright blue ball began to flow in his hand. The guy looked at it carefully. His face became focused. Moo exhaled in surprise, not believing that there was an elemental in front of him, and even opened his mouth, in which the kernels of teeth were glowing. Don guessed that the boy had a wind elemental, and the dog enthusiastically saw off the spirit. The man raised his head. This is the reason he called the guys here today. He wants to talk to them seriously. He admitted that the only elemental discovered in the country today is Moo, and this has not changed during the 17 years of his work. The hero also continued that he looked at Jack's heroic dossier, but could not find anything related to this elemental. The only interesting thing is that the guy left the Kiro's guild and joined the fun, but did not want to conclude that the elemental was just received. Jack didn't know what to say or how to explain Sylph's appearance to him. Then he looked helplessly at the girl next to him. She agreed to tell. She looked at Dawn, began her story, and from the very first words made the man lean forward with interest. The girl explained that it was her mother. She was the owner of the previous one. Sylph was the spirit of a woman. The head of the guild rubbed his chin and chuckled. Who would have thought that the guy would end up signing a contract with an elemental? This was the first time in all this time. He believed that when the owner dies, his elemental also disappears, dispelled doubts, raised his head with a smile, and decided to get straight to the point. She looked at the man with alarm. She didn't understand. She always thought that Sylph was the main reason. He pointed with his fingers 2 times and said that there were 2 reasons he wanted to talk to them about today. And that was why the guys were here. He admitted that he wanted to be frank with the young people, darkened, and finally said that as the head of the Bone, he would like to lead the Fun Guild as well. Camilla screamed in shock. Jack clenched his lips and stared at the guy, not quite understanding such a proposal. I voiced the price I was willing to pay, slammed my hand on the table. The girl didn't accept it. I tried to persuade her to give me an even higher amount. He lowered his head. Don's shoulders tensed. He tried to reason, even if they hired another hero. He tried to persuade him if only they sold the shares, even teach him how to handle elemental magic. He would, under no circumstances, interfere in the affairs of the guild. The lenses of his glasses sparkled. He raised his head. The offer was too tempting. He thought they would agree now. Camilla raised her head. A smile appeared on her face. Definitely a great offer. But sudden, the man even offered time to think about it. Don leaned back contentedly and began to speak. But his speech quickly stopped when he heard Jack refuse such an offer. He twisted his lips. A drop of sweat rolled down his face. Wrinkles cut across his forehead. He didn't expect to hear that, he asked again. But the main character will never make concessions or sell the guild. His gaze is determined and looks straight at the leader. Channing looked around the place, put his hands on his hips. He didn't understand what had happened here. The guys were twisted and hanging in the air. Looking closely, he put his hand to his forehead. He removed everything and returned, but did not find the guy here. He turned his head. At this time, Don leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms over the armrests. If he didn't like the amount, he could increase it. Jack didn't remain in debt. He also leaned forward a little. He heard that they spent about 20 billion to cover this place with a magical barrier, the guy stated. This will not be enough. The Fun Guild, just like the dice, will become a great guild. The character grinned and squinted. Camilla couldn't take it anymore and exploded. Grabbed the boy by the chest, shook him. You shouldn't decide everything alone, she screamed. Tears glistened in the blue eyes that flowed down the girl's beautiful and pure face. She looked helplessly at the head. The man laughed very loudly, crossed one leg over the other, and raised his hand to his forehead. Then he looked at the boy, his red eyes flashing. Apparently he wanted to make a great guild out of two people. He considered the youth too arrogant. He squinted. He wouldn't have called it confidence, he argued, but fell silent. Only watched. He grinned, adjusted his glasses, leaned over, and the man thought that the guy's voice still sounded too confident. He jumped up, raised his hands, accepted it, and refused the deal. The girl tried to scream, but they didn't hear her. Secretary Jeannie came in right away, carrying in her hands the very same magic crystal that Jack had received in the battle with the monster. The boy stared in surprise, did not understand the reason for his return, did not dare to accept, and waited for an answer. The association finished its research, was going to hand over the crystal after capturing the Fun Guild, smugly enjoying the knowledge that he was very good as an elementalist mentor. Jack had already pulled out the crystal. He would accept it with gratitude. But he did not understand the reason for so much fuss. He held the red stone in his hand. Elementalists can increase their power by absorbing it from such magical crystals as the one that was now in the boy's hands. Don spoke mesmerizingly while the ball glowed in the hero's hands. It is worth collecting them, the man suggested. Then the spirit will be able to materialize as Mu. The blonde girl answered the incoming call with a smile, introduced herself. The International Union for the Protection of Creatures was working at full capacity. There were many like her, and they all talked on the phone and recorded cases. Another woman approached her, asked about the next volunteer trip, leaned back in her chair and stuttered. While chatting sweetly with each other, they remembered their grandmother who hugged them. The lady in the chair laughed and agreed with her. She narrowed her eyes, hoping that other people would understand too. Their mission was to make people realize. Suddenly the girl's face darkened and she suddenly fell silent, clenched her teeth, and began to peer in the direction from which the sound came. The girls looked away. Even one screamed. It seemed to them that the creature was hungry. They calmed down. The woman walked forward, cheerfully thinking about what she could get. Another one chimed in that she should give something light. Opening the doors, the smile became crazy. She chuckled, choosing what to offer the monster. Before her eyes appeared a picture of an elderly woman lying bound hand and foot and gagged, her eyes begging for mercy. She put her hand on her hip and scolded him for being an old lady and still alive. A girl came up to her, folded her arms across her chest in displeasure, and seemed too lively for an elderly person. The old woman began to shake. Her face turned red. She squinted and tears began to stream down her eyes. A huge mouth rushed towards her. Sharp fangs and crazy yellow eyes saw the target in front of them. The woman stood behind the bars, smiling and holding her hand to her lips in delight, praising the cat who was eating. A girl came up to her. They started talking among themselves. She asked not to overfeed him, but just to bring another one here for dinner. The conversation flowed as if there were nothing strange. Suddenly, attention was drawn to a car that drove into the center. It was the manager, and girls came towards him. The car door opened. A high-heeled boot and a clean, ironed brown suit stuck out. Manager Michael held a handbag in his hands, smiling with narrowed eyes. His lip was cut and had already healed. The girls started shouting joyfully, greeting him. He spoke kindly to everyone, asked about the trip, to which he received a response about the cute kids he brought with him. It's worth checking them out later. Stepping forward, arms outstretched to attract attention, the guy made an announcement. He showed the weapon in his hand. It was a pistol with a purple charge and interested everyone present. There was some whispering in the office, but the guy walked forward, explaining with each step, reminding them of the basilisk in the monster's territory. Approaching the creature in the cage, the previous individual had problems with control. Now this should end. Everything will be different. He pointed the gun at the kitten in the cage. A grin appeared on his lips, and promised to do even better. A shot rang out, and the cage was illuminated with purple light. The man froze and watched, not moving. After a while, there were claps. Satisfied with the result of the weapon, the claps became louder and louder. Manager Mikhail was pleased with himself. The lighting made him look intimidating. The smile on his face turned into a grin. People dispersed. The streets became safe and calm, dispersed into small groups. Our guys were there too. Jack walked forward, putting his hand to his forehead like a visor and looking out for something important. He turned to Camilla, began his speech about magic crystals. Goosebumps ran through his body. He chuckled, and a shadow appeared behind his back. It was Channing, a dark-faced young man shouting discontentedly, accusing the hero of having disappeared and not being anywhere yesterday. Camilla raised her hands to her chest and pulled back. Jack turned his head and looked at him in surprise. The character calmly figured out what was wrong, screaming and waving his arms that they left him alone after asking him to take care of the cat yesterday. When it finally came down to the fact that the guy had simply forgotten about Channing, the boy became offended, folded his arms across his chest, lowered his head and trembled all over. Then he suddenly raised his head. Hysterical laughter was heard. Camilla even showed sympathy, afraid that he might go crazy. But after handing over the phone, two heads stared at it. The guy continued. He wondered if the guys would be able to maintain their composure after this. The young men cried out, pleased with themselves. Channing sold everything that was from the basilisk and the saber-toothed cat. Having taken the phone, they tried to count the zeros. They couldn't believe it. But the happy young man praised himself. He was able to sell everything at a high price. Jack smiled. He was confident in Channing. Camilla ran up and gave rays of love to the boy, idolized him, but he became arrogant, saying that he could sell everything for a good price. He showed a coin in his hand and with a smile began to talk about the commission. Usually he takes 10% for collection and sale, but Jack rudely interrupted him, shouting about 4% and looking at him straight on without a twinkle in his eyes. The guys started arguing with each other, haggling over percentages, shouting and not listening. He immediately fell silent. The main character raised his finger up, ending the negotiations. The boy was even confused by this turn of events. Camilla opened her mouth in surprise. She didn't know that her friend was such a bandit. She stared at the boys in confusion. She didn't know what they were doing. Suddenly, footsteps were heard that broke the silence. A huge mouse was walking down the street, with a knapsack with things on its back. Camilla said skeptically. Displeasure appeared on her face. Her blue eyes narrowed. Mika walked along with the mouse. Everyone followed her with their eyes and whispered, discussing the tamer. Her guild, Snowflake, was one person. Blue eyes glanced to the side, waved her black hair, adjusting it with her hand. The girl was known for hunting only saber-toothed tigers. She was obsessed with them. No one knew the reason for this attitude. Jack and his team stood with their arms folded across their chests, watching the stranger, listening in on the whispers of people. Camilla's mouth stretched in admiration. Even her cheeks turned red. "The tamer looks amazing," she exhaled. Jack said, shaking his head, that they urgently needed to enter the monster's territory. He was worried because the girl specializes in saber-toothed cats. If they were late, the chinchilla would take everything in its path. While saying all this, I didn't notice how the clouds thickened over the character. It was that same chinchilla standing next to him. He raised his head to the beast, became confused and dissatisfied thoughts, even curses, flashed through his head. He saw the teeth almost leaning over his head. The guy looked at him with interest and without fear, still continuing to remain silent. Camilla screamed, throwing up her hand, covering Jack with her body. Channing also stood up for her, putting his hands on his hips. A voice sounded nearby, quiet and soothing. The guy even calculated the probability of an attack by a monster, but the hero was in minimal danger. The children saw that the chinchilla did not show aggression towards the character, but on the contrary, licked him on the nose and were confused. Mika also whistled in surprise. She didn't think that her beast could be interested in another person. The girl adjusted her hair with her hand. A smile appeared on her face, introduced herself, was glad to meet them, and headed towards them. The guy showed friendliness, extended his hand, introduced himself and named the head of his guild, and waved his hand in confusion. He couldn't resist anymore and raised his hand, waving it. The chinchilla continued to lick him like candy. She couldn't resist asking Mika about the hamster, but when she learned about the guy's lack of animals, she thought about it, raised her hand to her lips, and did not understand the behavior of her animal. Channing drew the tamer's attention to himself, crouched down and grabbed her hands, introducing himself, bestowing his charm and smiles, covering herself, the chinchilla and this boy, licking and drooling, the people around. Noticing the ice lady's interest in the guild, began to whisper. The guys started talking even louder now, discussing the guys from the fun guild, and remembered yesterday's meeting with Don. The young people saw this too. Mika also looked up and apologized for attracting the attention of other people. Having stroked her beast, touched him, she went to the monster's territory, while Channing lay on the asphalt and tears flowed down his cheeks. They watched the girl from the Snowflake Guild. The last time the hero saw news about her was 3 or 4 years ago. Judging by how popular she was, she should have been promoted to the 3rd class. The question hung, which no one asked. Why the girl was still in 4th grade? Glanced sideways and froze. He chuckled, lowered his head, shook it and closed his eyes, driving away the thoughts that wouldn't leave his head. He turned to the guys, saying that they should also go inside. They agreed, although they were busy with something else. Channing was offered to stay right there. He was still lying on the asphalt, smiled and grunted in agreement. Jack and Camila walked down the hallway, looking around the place. The guy in front and the girl behind, looking back. The girl was surprised and did not understand where the monsters were. They had already walked 5 floors, but had not met anyone. The thought of another guild even flashed through our minds. We stopped on the stairs, wondering what to do, but decided that it was worth going up. Camilla walked with difficulty. Climbing the stairs was not very fun. On one of the flights of stairs, someone's voice shouted out. Looking out from the upper floor, the young man got angry. Everything around him went dark. He cursed. It was Michael from the Knife Guild in front of them. Holding onto the railing, a man descended, cursing at the youth. On the 1st floor, there was a sign that specified that the buildings were points of the Knife Guild. Camila screamed, "She doesn't accept this nonsense." But the guys got mad, swore at them. They don't even understand the language. Michael folded his arms across his chest and explained the point that if a cool guild took a good spot, the rest would just watch in silence. He leaned over the railing, clarified, especially relevant for a guild consisting of 2 people, and shouted, "To get out of here!" Jack didn't lose his head. On the contrary, he began to drive away this impudent guild, slowly starting to go wild himself. The man looked displeased, grimaced as soon as he heard the guy's speech about the ban on marking a place behind the guild. He will file a complaint about the actions to the Ministry of Heroes, cursed the member of the knife team. The rest of the people from this guild stood behind the guy. Everything around darkened. An evil grin appeared on the lips, but Jack calmly asked again about the threat, counted the number of people on the team, and his blue eyes sparkled. I thought about the location of the stairs. It's hard for 4 people to go down at once. I calculated the probability of winning. And it pleased me. People were already starting to slowly push the hero. They would try to repel the attack. They would light up with their body strength. The guy's chance of winning was 80%. The blades closed, and there was a crack. A bead of sweat rolled down the man's temple. Our hero didn't even flinch. But the attackers were starting to feel uneasy. He glanced sideways at his team members, became angry at their inaction, and shouted about the attack. One magician agreed with him. A fireball lit up in his hands. It grew larger and larger, gathering energy. Jack concentrated. His eye flashed blue and called to his partner without turning his head. After receiving a response from the girl, the boy rushed into battle, pulling out his weapon, with Camilla weaving a spell behind him. The magicians cast their spells. The girl poured blue cold into the attack. The attacking magician released his light as fire. Camilla and Jack ran downstairs, covering themselves with their hands from the dust that made their eyes water. And they even tried to breathe every other time. But the Knife Guild didn't understand at all, shouted about escaping and rushed after them in an attempt to catch up. The girl turned around, shouted menacingly, pointed her open palm at them, and a bright yellow light poured out. While the man was turning his head, the main character flew towards him from behind, moving silently and taking out a knife. The guy got his bearings, turned around, and the weapons clashed. The fire from the blades scattered in different directions. The trembling man clenched his teeth. He didn't understand. He didn't fully believe that the guy was really fourth grade, like himself. It was too hard to fight back. The young man flew to the side. His legs ended up in a vulnerable position, which the boy took advantage of. Having fallen, he could not hold on. A stream of abuse flowed from his mouth, threatening, scolding, threatening that the guild would find him. Jack smiled, recalling the words that the man had said about them taking responsibility for their lives. A slow wind enveloped the others in red threads. They realized that they were no match. They would not win. Camilla expressed doubt and suggested that the guy leave everything as is, using several abilities. The entire knife team wondered who was in front of them. The guy turned around, putting his hand on his hip. The guys discussed among themselves how to quickly put out the fire. But the magician was not very good in the water elements, so it took time. The black-haired man exhaled, putting his hands on his hips. They didn't find a single saber-toothed cat. He was upset that he was simply wasting his energy. He chuckled, suddenly suspecting something, turned around, clenching his teeth, interested in what was happening. The magician did not notice the actions behind him, calmly poured the water blade. The spell flowed from his hand. The boy even turned his head to say that the job was done. But there was no one to say it to. The black-haired guy was being squeezed in the teeth of a huge cat. Covered in blood, his eyes rolling back, with his last breath he begged his friend for help, his body shaking. The guy's eyes turned white. His mouth opened in horror. Drops of blood reached him, and the sound of his head crunching was heard. Camilla and Jack stopped and turned around, hearing a scream from the escape stairs. The young man immediately understood what had happened there. His tense face tried to concentrate, but they were shouting too loudly. But he concentrated and calculated that it would be unlikely for the boy to get out alive. And the face of a huge cat appeared. Jack saw a new species of saber-toothed cat, its eyes glowing blue. The guys froze in shock. Camilla spoke up, doubtfully asking about the existence of such a beast. The guy agreed, but he admitted that this was the first time he had seen such an incredible variation, with a protruding double tongue, yellow glowing eyes, and a size larger than them. The members of the Knife Guild shook, stuttering, and could not even reason or speak clearly. Jack turned to them and shouted an order to unite with them. This must be done now. I saw, to my great annoyance, only the backs of these cowards, shouting as they ran to stop fooling around. 4 people couldn't do it with that look. He looked, blue eyes sparkled. It is impossible for 2 people to cope with the 4th grade variety, the young man thought. The girl and the boy gathered together. The monster was advancing, slowly but surely moving towards the guys. They prepared for battle. The young man clenched his teeth, sweat dripping down his face. He acknowledged the monstrous power. If he hadn't covered the sword with his element, it would have broken long ago. There was no point in wasting time, the guy reasoned. He needed to hit the monster with one blow. He bowed his head. His eyes flashed. Camilla cast a wind-slowing spell, pointing her staff towards the cat. The young man turned his eyes to her. She gave the order to her friend that it was time to attack, using her magic, and rushed towards the monster. There was a whistle. A light poured out and Jack missed. The saber-toothed cat simply dodged. The creature raised its paw. The boy flew away, coughing up blood. He did not understand how the monster could be so fast. Camila screamed and directed all her beams of power at the huge monster, who had now chosen another victim. Letting out a short roar, it rushed towards the girl, opening its mouth with sharp white teeth, its eyes turning into slits. The aura thickened and turned red. A clawed paw swung over Camila. She was confused and could not react quickly. The last thoughts that flashed across her darkened face were that she wouldn't have time to dodge, and she froze in shock. And then, unexpectedly for everyone, a familiar chinchilla jumped out, its menacing face sniffing the air, its beady eyes glowing. Guildmaster Fun watched as the monster was blown away, wondering where the chinchilla came from. Coming to the huge hole in the wall, Camila looked down and asked her question out loud. She glanced sideways and heard Mika come to check. Since the explosion interested her, she didn't think she would meet this guild. The beautiful tamer walked forward. A rather rude greeting sounded again. A sweeping step was directed towards her beast. She saw that the boy was unconscious against the wall and made the verdict that there must have been big problems if she had come a little later. Turning to the girl, he will deal with this creature, and gave her instructions to take her friend and run away. Tried to argue with her. They wanted to ask for help. She asked me not to worry. Darkened. She knew saber-toothed cats better than anyone else. Camila frowned, noticed that the aura had changed, and looked intently at Mika. The same one, without thinking twice, jumped out of the hole, and the black-haired girl went on a wonderful flight. At this time, the chinchilla hung over the trembling cat. Neither animal gave up. They held each other tightly, making a sound, the beast. Miki raised its head to its owner, who quickly rushed to help. The monster grabbed her throat. The girl cast a spell, forging it while she was flying. The icy rain was already ready in her hand. I used it and already encased it in ice. The cat froze in a grin, sharp teeth sticking out. But it quickly coped with such a powerful spell. So the girl was very surprised. Sitting on the beast, she understood that in front of them was a different variation. The two creatures stood opposite each other, assessing each other's abilities, not daring to attack first. While casting another spell, Mika decided that it wouldn't change anything anyway. Her hands fluttered in the air. She noticed that the cat had a special strength, but also a huge weakness and was already attacking again, bending lower and lower. Mika noted smugly that after this, she definitely wouldn't be able to get up. But how surprising was what happened next. The unusual mobility that saber-toothed cats possess is due to their flexibility. The black-haired lady prepared for battle, but she also knew that if their muscles contracted from the cold, their joints would not bear their weight and would collapse. Their battle would end then, she thought, when the ice arrow hit the cat. Camila stood and watched in shock. The species that she and Jack had a hard time fighting threw up its hands in confusion. The boy near the wall stirred, pressed his hand to his chest, called his head, and she screamed. Without raising his head, he took care of others. Immediately decided that it was worth helping Miki, he raised his hand to his mouth. The girl assured him that there was definitely no need to worry about her. Raising his head, the guy's eyes swam blue, and he barely audibly said that this was not the end. Everything was still ahead. The guy was calculating the probability of the tamer's victory, while she, at that time, raised her weapon over the cat, promising to finish it as painlessly as possible. She opened her mouth. A deafening roar was heard. Her yellow eyes flared with fire, and she directed her aggression at the black-haired lady. The huge beast rose in front of the girl, leaning on its clawed, powerful paws, and roared. The saber-toothed cat called the rest of her relatives, who began to surround Mika and her chinchilla. She looked at him, lowering her head. A slight fear splashed in her deep blue eyes. The probability of her victory was less than 10%. Leaning on Camilla's shoulders, Jack watched what was happening. Seeing that the monster had gathered all the cats nearby, he flashed an eye, frowned, and in the end, this is what happened and this is what came out. His focused face tried to concentrate on further actions. Then he turned his head to Camilla and asked about levitation. It wasn't perfect, but she could use it to some extent. He nodded to his thoughts. A ball of power lit up in his hand. With his other hand, he pressed the girl closer to him, holding her by the waist. She blushed, looked away, and screamed from such a possessive gesture. There was no other way out. He sped up, hugging the girl tighter and tighter, and picked her up in his arms. Camilla's scream was heard in flight. She was outraged that he had not warned about his actions. The boy was already descending. Mika was weaving a spell at this time, completely concentrated on the monster, her serious face expressing no emotions, and she didn't see at all that from behind, with her mouth open, blue eyes flashed when she felt movement behind her. The chinchilla rushed forward, defending itself and its owner. But there were too many saber-toothed cats. Wiping my face, I realized that there were too many of them. Exhaling air from my chest, I needed to find this variety. I needed to kill it faster. The girl suddenly fell silent and stared forward in shock, hearing someone's voice. The air was ringing. Camilla buried her face in the guy's shoulder. They were descending from above, apparently. Mika heard this sound. Jack shouted loudly so that the speech would reach her, so that the girl would quickly use levitation. In response, a frightened, heart-rending voice was already using a spell, drawing it behind the boy's back. Her blue eyes flashed, and she realized that she had managed to slow them down. But the little girl wasn't strong enough to stop them in midair. A bright blue light poured out of his hand. He wanted to save his mana, but there was no other way out. It worked, and leaving Camilla, he rushed, drawing his sword to help the girl, his blue eyes shining. Using the spell, the character flew into the attack in a blue-green light, shouting another magic about the blade of the wind, and the blade of the sword lengthened and sharpened in his hand. He landed, exhaled air, leaning on the stick, tried to use mana as effectively as possible, but it still took a lot of his strength. Mika was running towards him, shouting as she went that it was worth staying safe. He glanced sideways at her. He stood up and became indignant, but that was how he came to help. And in turn, the tamer began to argue. She did not want to accept anyone's help. He reminded her of saber-toothed cats, and the girl's face immediately became gloomy. Her blue eyes filled with light. She pressed her lips together. The memories were not very pleasant. Behind Camilla, the chinchilla growled and was about to turn its head, puzzled. Mika was acting too self-confidently. But the guy had already calculated the probability and came to the conclusion that these were not the same ones. The monster summoned more and more new cats, growling and shining yellow eyes. There were already quite a few saber-toothed monsters surrounding the creature. With each growl, more and more appeared. Mika stood behind Jack, stunned. According to her calculations, the monster's joints should have already fallen apart, but the guy was sure that the cat could restore them. She raised her head, never having seen such healing abilities in a representative of this species before. Memories immediately reminded her of the past, when she stretched out her bloody hands to the side, wanting to save, but it did not happen. The guy had no idea what the girl was facing. He turned around and looked at her. The new type of cat was only slightly wounded. They should work together now. But the character remained unanswered. The girl rushed forward, waving her arms, not stopping for a second. He gritted his teeth, looked intently, did not understand why Mika had suddenly become so reckless. Now he knew that she was the reason for working alone. He turned to Camilla and shouted for cover. The girl was already running, ready to protect her friend. The saber-toothed cats scattered and could no longer be stopped, rushing towards the heroes, their eyes flashing, their sharp claws out and their mouths opening in a terrible grin. The girl ran away, dodging the invasion of cats, while they tried to catch up with her and scratch her with their claws. She turned around. A grin appeared on Mika's face no worse than a cat's, and she shouted for them not to disturb her. The cat attacked from above. The tamer became confused and fell silent. A small delay turned out to be solvable. They were regaining their strength too quickly. Jack jumped up and warned him not to eat Mickey, as cold food could give him a stomachache. The chinchilla angrily flashed its little yellow eyes and fiercely fought off the attacks with its paws. Camilla's help came in handy. She directed her spell with the help of a spear, and it flew to its target. The guy jumped up, swinging his sword. Now it will all end now. A joyful thought flashed through his mind. But then she disappeared, blocking the road, Mickey stood with her arms outstretched, asking not to kill the saber-toothed cat. The young man was confused, raised his hand, did not understand what the girl was doing. They had to kill him before he recovered. Mika continued to stand her ground. She needed a saber-toothed cat to capture the species without killing it. Jack got angry, angrily assured that it was worth killing the cat, and the tamer's answer provoked anger. The guy's face changed. He grimaced. He didn't understand the reason for such behavior. He frowned. The monster behind the girl glowed with a bright light, stuck out its tongue and almost attacked her. But she stubbornly stood her ground. The boys grew gloomy. The aura thickened. They did not understand what was happening, and the behavior of the tamer made them think. The young people turned around, and behind them there were also cats. It was that monster who called the saber-toothed ones to surround the heroes. He lowered his eyes, cursed. His mana was running out. What should they do now? The hero could not concentrate on his actions. Help came from the outside. They put out their swords. The guy and the girl saw strangers. He heard a rough voice calling them amateurs. The voice was familiar. The boy frowned, his eyes narrowed. Despite the fact that the guys passed the exam for promotion, they can't handle a couple of cats, the guild members whispered among themselves. Ben stopped the whispering, looked closely at the guy. A man in a sharp suit was watching them. He was expecting something like this. These people must be from the third-grade team. The man was watching through binoculars. He lowered his binoculars, hoping that the first-class team would join the fight. But he was expecting too much. It was the manager, Michael. He turned to his escorts and heard that as for further actions, since they had nothing to do here yet, they decided to retreat. It was not a loss. They would continue to work as scheduled. There were many people behind him, but they were all in black cloaks and their eyes were not visible. Ben's guild members stared, unable to believe what it was, and the boy even cursed, unable to hold back. Looking at the monster that had changed and was now a pile of muscles, they realized that the hero department had too much work to do. Jack was assisted by a man in a suit who leaned on his hand and remained silent, not saying a word. Camila also raised her eyes to the guys in special clothes and waved her hand in greeting. Mika turned her head, her blue eyes watching the boy's actions. A week later, Jack, covered in bandages covering his wounds, looked at the phone in his hand under his head. Channing ran in shouting, pointing somewhere with his hand. About the territory of monsters where they were talking on all channels. But the hero did not tell about everything. The boy's words outraged him. He claimed that they were business partners. Jack's thoughts wandered, and he even began to doubt hiring such an employee. 8 heroes died in the monster territory that day. A special group in suits removed the remains. The hero division had greatly underestimated the number of saber-toothed cats lurking in the underground parking lot. And as he peeled off the Band-Aid from his cheek, the boy stood up, having a bad feeling about this. What was also very disconcerting was that this variety was not like anything I had seen before. He even suggested that he shouldn't think about it so much, closed his eyes, and tore off the bandage from his other cheek. Channing looked away thoughtfully, said that he had not seen Camilla today, but the character eagerly said that she had taken a week's leave to settle some personal matters. Suddenly, there was a ringing sound, which became louder and louder. The guys froze. The boy admitted, folding his arms across his chest. It was the first time he heard this phone ring before. It was the guild hotline. Jack walked up and carefully picked up the phone, closed his eyes, and began his speech. But when he heard who was on the other end of the line, he froze and opened his eyes wide in surprise. Channing turned around and screamed as soon as he heard Mika calling. The boy looked too stunned. He immediately put on his movie glasses, opened his mouth, and beads of sweat ran down his cheeks. And he would also like some popcorn. The girl said that she had found her only way to contact the Fun Guild. Jack laughed. She asked about the guy's wounds. But a week passed and everything became fine. I looked out the window and the conversation flowed evenly. Everyone asked their questions, showing politeness, listening attentively to the girl, realizing that she hardly called the hotline just to check on her health. And finally, Jack heard that Mika would like to see him if there was time and desire. Channing screamed, even spitting out the popcorn he had managed to get, unable to believe it. At this time, Camilla was talking on the phone with her father, pressing her shoulder to his ear. She was polishing her staff, Dad was interested in the variety, worried about his daughter. He couldn't hold back, raised his voice, reminded her to be extremely careful. And even the girl raised her voice at him. But the guy who works with his daughter seems reliable to the man. And even the girl stopped because of this. Camila blushed at the memory of Jack, cooed, agreeing completely. If it weren't for him, she would be where she was. The man clutched the telephone receiver to his ear and listened attentively to his daughter. The black-haired man with glasses and wrinkles at the corners of his eyes narrowed his eyes. Hoping to meet him, he said softly. Killian was Camilla's father, and the chief researcher for the study of monsters. Holding a portrait of the girl's mother, he is interested in the guy who has inherited his wife's element. The door opened, and the girl called the man to study the newly arrived sample. He looked back at her. He was going to go now. Hearing this, Camilla tried to call her father and find out about his arrival in the city. The last thing the girl heard was that she would be arriving for her mother's anniversary. After finishing the conversation, she looked at the phone in her hand and didn't learn anything new. She stretched, closing her eyes. She had a lot of things to do around the house, she chuckled, still holding the phone in her hands. I looked at the doorbell and saw that it was Channing calling, and my curiosity was piqued. It was a quiet day. People were walking and going about their business. The warm sun was shining. Jack was walking down the street, one hand in his trouser pocket, wearing a nice suit and a white shirt. He remembered the boy who handed him a bracelet, which was considered to bring good luck. He put it on and looked sideways. He tore himself away from his thoughts. The hero turned his head at the call, was surprised. His eyes widened. His hand hovered. Mika walked towards him, modestly raising her hand to her hair, looked at the guy, was late, and now was confused. I assessed her appearance. The hero calmed her down, assured her that he had only just come up, and she exhaled. They headed there together. The table was reserved. They started a conversation, and they were being watched from the side. Channing and Camila dressed up so that they wouldn't be noticed and would be resented because the couple was having dinner together. She clenched her hand into a fist. The girl cursed, and even thought that this was a plan to take Jack to her guild. The guys were watching them from the corner. They were chatting nicely and didn't suspect they were being watched. They drank coffee and other drinks. They liked everything, and generally behaved like old good friends. Next on the agenda was a shooting range, where they laughed, shot at targets, and spent time together. The boys watched, and everything seemed strange to them. But they won the bear and were now arguing about who would carry it. As if on a date, Camilla couldn't stand it. So she slapped the guy who was talking about the date. The girl left, and the crumpled Channing indignantly shouted that it couldn't be left like that. Pretending that Jack's personal meetings did not concern her, she still felt sad and very irritated. Meanwhile, the hero stretched. He was having fun. He hadn't gone anywhere for a long time. Mika also liked this day, hugging the bear with both hands. But then the guy's face changed. It was time to tell why their meeting took place today. She looked at him with fear. He glanced at her, understood that she had not asked him to spend time with her for this reason, and fell silent in anticipation. I waited for Mika to tell me something, but she looked down and began her story. She hoped that the guy would be able to keep her company. They came to the hospital. The guy stopped and looked at the girl with confusion. The girl passed by, told the hero about her sister, and he followed her, still lost in the riddles. Jack's eyes lit up, light streaming from them, calculating and analyzing. Seeing the girl connected to the machines on the bed, his ability was immediately activated as soon as he crossed the ward. Sonia was Mika's sister. Her blood pressure was weak. Although her breathing was stable, she had Manny discoloration syndrome. I was amazed by this diagnosis. It was the first time I encountered it, so I was surprised and looked carefully. Mika walked forward a little with the toy and explained the reason for hunting only saber-toothed cats. It was all because of her sister. She continued her story. 4 years have passed since the cat attacked them, and the girl is still in a coma. Realization took hold of the hero. He understood the true motives of the tamer. Adjusting the blanket, Mika agreed. She was looking for a way out, and thought that she could continue. Doubts overwhelmed her. She was afraid that she had made a mistake. She had thought then that healing the species might help her sister. But the reports she saw today showed no connection. She lowered her head, began to apologize for her behavior that day, and everyone was in danger because of her. Jack waved his hands, calming her down. It darkened again, began to read the probability. The eye flared, determined the profile. The girl standing in front of him was the most important figure for the growth of the Fun Guild. Currently, a quarter of the required number of people has been collected, so doubts have taken hold of the guy. Memories immediately brought back memories of such probability statistics before, when Channing was saved. Then he was still trying to stop the girl who was angry with Channing. He extended his hand in an attempt. The boy sat on his knees, lowered his head and closed his eyes, tears congealing in the corners of his eyes. He froze, as if he was thinking about something for himself. It seemed to him earlier that the ability was directing him to some kind of quest. His skill hadn't behaved like this before, so he hired Channing to work with their guild to see the response of his skill. This is the second time Jack's ability has been activated. Only now it was caused by Mika. He looked confused. Continuing to look at the tamer, he wondered how many more people he needed to find. He put his hand to his head, made calculations. The eye was still blazing and the light was pouring out. Mika looked at Jack with alarm, raised her hands to him, but her head spun a little. But everything was fine. When he joined this guild, there was a high probability that it would become great. But now, additional requirements should appear. He raised his hand to his face. He squinted. Wrinkles appeared on his forehead. He grimaced. He didn't suspect that his analysis skill could mock him. In any case, he decided to do everything for himself. Asked the girl a question and took her by surprise. Jack turned his head and looked at Mickey's sister. And during all this time, she could not find a clue how to get out of a coma. The guy zealously assured that he didn't know all the details, so maybe he shouldn't tell. But if she still hadn't found anything useful, it was worth thinking about a new approach. She threw up her hands and asked about him with fervor, the blue of pain splashing in her eyes. I decided to demonstrate it on myself. Showed my wrist with scratches because it is necessary to carry out disinfection, and again turned to her with a question. She shook her head negatively. Then the boy began to tell about the composition of this ointment, what should be applied. He told me more about the plant. It has antibacterial and anti-inflammatory effects. I watched with interest. Raise the ointment up. Direct application of the leaves or stems of the plant will not help to treat open wounds, but it is this extract that has healing properties. But the man continued speaking, fascinated, and the girl looked thoughtfully in the direction. The girl's sister probably has the same situation, and I even suggested that the reason for her condition might be something else, not related to saber-toothed cats. But from Mika's reaction, the character realized that she had already understood everything, and now doubts had taken hold. Not a bad person, the hero tried to think, because the goal of the hunt was to get possessed by the monsters that did this to her sister. I saw how warmly the tamer looked at Sonia. Her eyes sparkled, and concern was reflected on her face. Then he continued, taking advantage of the opportunity, and expressed his proposal to her. Seeing the interest, the character straightened up and loudly voiced his desire for official employment. Mika turned to him, asked again about the Fun Guild, and he confirmed his offer. He fervently assured that if he agreed, all members of the guild would do everything to try to find a way to cure his sister. My mouth dropped open in surprise when I heard that he doesn't make empty promises, and that they can even sign a contract as a guarantee. I used my ability again. Analyzed the probability of Sonia coming out of her coma. Nothing changed in the calculations. There was no way to know if her sister would recover. The eyes swam and filled with light. But he should recruit her by any means. She raised her hands to her lips. The girl needed time to answer. Her eyes widened. It was worth thinking about. He raised his hands, smiled. There were no problems. I thanked her sincerely in response. He stopped and looked at her. The best thing he could do right now was to give Mika the opportunity to sort herself out. Waving goodbye, he didn't want to stay long and said goodbye, leaving the little girl alone with herself. But he looked down at the bracelet, remembered something, froze, and it began to glow on his wrist. He turned around, taking it off, and turned to the girl. He forgot to give her something now, she was surprised, not hiding it. He handed over the bracelet, explaining that it was made from a lucky mustache, that it brought good luck, and he thought that it would look better on his sister's hand than on a guy. I looked at the bracelet in my hands and was sure that Sonia would like such a generous gift. As he was leaving, he turned around, hoping for a quick answer with a smile. But the girl was silent, but followed him with a thoughtful look. Warmth appeared in Mika's eyes. A blush appeared on her cheeks. And that was when she realized that the guy's attention was necessary now. People were sitting in a large, dark room. Men were exchanging glances with each other. The head of the guild, Karaz, folded his arms across his chest, lowered his head in displeasure, closed his eyes, and did not tolerate identification. The presenter on the podium leaned towards the microphone. They all waited for quite a long time. The head of the guild, Kostya, was not there. He showed up, but was clearly unhappy with such an early meeting, walking along, scratching his neck. The secretary noticed that she was talking to Don about the rush. Only the lenses of his glasses flashed when he looked at her, too busy to come here. He was even given a displeased remark when they heard what the man was saying to the woman. The head of the warrior guild, Serge, frowned. His forehead was cut by protruding veins. It was obvious that everyone in this room was waiting only for Don. A smile lit up the man's face as he looked up and saw the speaker. And he was glad that he had returned from the dead. Serge jumped up, clenching his hands into fists. No one could destroy them. They cleared this territory of monsters many years ago. He exhaled, hinting that the guy in front of him was too loud, and glanced to the side. Another blond man propped his face up with his hand and accused the chief of immaturity. Without removing his hand from his face, a caustic smile flashed, and his crazy eyes settled on the victim, who had not learned his lesson even after being beaten. These altercations were noticed by others, and a female voice noted that the men were behaving like children in an attempt to tear each other's throats out. The woman with red eyes poured in, looked down, and didn't understand why they constantly needed to prove something. He turned to her, whistled, did not expect to see Kim. 3 years had passed since their last meeting. Don's next words made the girls angry. She exploded, got angry, and asked again about old age. Sitting down on a chair, throwing his hands behind his head, the man smiled contentedly, convinced of his irascibility. The chief who had gathered all the heads coughed, attracted attention to himself. It was time to start. They had been waiting for a long time. Ben, without raising his head, flashed his glasses, told the reason why all the heads were gathered today. It is connected with the territory of monsters. Now he is ready to reveal the details. When he revealed that those involved in the incident were the people who voted, only Don did not look surprised. His smile turned into a grin when he said that now they could easily break into the headquarters. The red-haired girl raised her hand indignantly. You need to think before you speak. Those people are acting on a global level. Their involvement is not enough for an accusation. Ben tightened his grip on the microphone and impatiently continued that the girl was right. The heroes were powerless, and it was even possible that this would develop into a diplomatic problem. He asked to look at the screen, and everyone saw a new variety of saber-toothed cat that was different from all the others. The men became agitated. They had never seen such monsters. Some of them cursed. Even he agreed with them. The fair-haired boy admitted that it looked disgusting. Ben couldn't keep silence, so he spoke quite loudly without holding back his emotions. The monster department constantly receives reports about such monsters. The head of the warrior guild folded his arms across his chest. Discontent was evident in his voice. He didn't understand why they had gathered. He didn't see anything unusual in the appearance of the monsters. The man in glasses nodded, agreeing with this, but his features confused him, because it was impossible to associate him with a special group based on his external features. He also told her about the new generation of monsters. The girl leaned forward. Curiosity was piqued, and she wanted to know more. He didn't spend much time explaining to everyone present. He told them about the mana crystal and merging with the monster. For everyone, it was a new discovery. Beg leaned his hands on the table and started talking about how they were just studying the crystal, and that it was in the new model cap that such a crystal was inserted, and that it was created artificially. Everyone started whispering. The liquid confused Ben, and he also told her about it. The secretary asked Don if he knew something, without changing her position. But he didn't know anything except that the elementals were absorbing him. The guy fell silent, thinking. He understood everything correctly about the result of the experiment with liquid mana. Thoughtfulness appeared on his face. The blond boy couldn't help but grin, hoping that there was still something that hadn't been decided. The doubt in his voice betrayed sarcasm. He didn't understand what relation those people had. He still didn't remove his hand from his face. Ben raised his head. The veins on his forehead bulged. Suspicious individuals were noticed in the monster territory that day. So this decision was made. He said that he noticed a drone and they were even able to recognize a person wearing glasses. Having zoomed in, he showed a black-haired man with glasses on the screen and told the available information about him. 4 years ago, he was still a researcher at the Faculty of Magical Engineering, but was soon fired due to an incident. Ben turned on his tablet. The screen lit up and he began to read, simultaneously telling the others. A young man stole mana crystals and conducted an illegal experiment on humans. Therefore, based on the evidence, he was considered the prime suspect in this situation. In order to detain Michael, they are now asking for help from all the heads of the guild, assistance in the investigation. At the bus stop, the guys started pointing somewhere to the side, discussing the man's appearance. All this reached Jack, who was holding the phone in his hands and reading something attentively. The guy was trying to figure out what was going on with Camilla. She wasn't responding or reading his messages, but he needed to discuss one important detail today. Although he had not yet received a response from Mika, it was still worth talking about hiring a tamer. He weighed all the possibilities and came to the conclusion that it would be great to get such an experienced guy. He sighed. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. The only problem is that they don't have enough finances to attract such a person. The car stopped abruptly. The tires rustled on the asphalt, and the guy was pulled out of his thoughts. Already sitting in the car, the young man needed to go, asked to be dropped off on a certain street, and exchanged glances with the driver. The old man laughed. Because of Jack's clothes, it was clear to everyone that he was a hero. He turned back to the road. His laughter became even louder. He could now boast to the other taxi drivers that he was driving a real hero. Taking a look at him, he assumed that the guy belonged to one of the famous guilds. The character became embarrassed, but the driver explained this too. Jack laughed and told his new acquaintance that he was from the Fun Guild, thinking that the man probably didn't know about them. But, oddly enough, he glanced at the guy. The taxi driver asked about both the cat and the guild. He knew them. The man simply lived there. So he was aware of everything, and again directed his gaze to the road, continuing the conversation. The boy noticed something strange. A girl with fox ears was walking down the alley. Her gait was even, but her clenched hands betrayed her nervousness. The driver was afraid of hybrids, and told the reason for this. Because of their animal nature or something similar, they easily became wild. Jack argued, "You can't tell anything bad from the girl's appearance. She goes to school. She's wearing a uniform." But the taxi driver stuck to his knowledge. Ordinary people would die if one of them attacked. So comparison wouldn't help here. The hero had to remain silent. Recognizing that he was right, the man could not think differently. They had been attacked so many times already, and it was scary. He turned towards the window. His thoughts were sad. The girl was a child. It was morally wrong to judge her like that. He immediately remembered Camilla, who also faced such treatment, and it hurt him. An attentive gaze was directed at the girl. He noticed something strange. That's why the reaction was like that. He saw the guys who were following the hybrid into a dark alley. It scared him. He turned to the taxi driver, shouted about his exit, and he tried to intervene, since they hadn't even reached their destination yet. He jumped out of the car as soon as they slowed down, waving his sword, and ran after them without even paying. The girl continued walking, not wanting to see that they were following her. The boys did not retreat and followed her. The hybrid also noticed the movement behind her and glanced her yellow eyes at the guys. She sped up, even started running. But the boys didn't like it and froze. One guy in a mask caught up with her and covered her mouth with his hand. Only screams came from her. She tried to get out. The rag was soaked with something, so the girl fell. They caught her under the arms and legs, happy that this time they had caught a young hybrid. Jack appeared behind them. He didn't remain silent and asked them what to do. The guys froze, sweated. Fear was reflected on their faces. The hero warned that he would count, and on 3, the girl should be released. Otherwise, it would be bad for everyone. He started counting and immediately rushed towards them, taking out his sword. The guys were confused. 3 seconds is not enough. A thug appeared and covered the road with his hand, froze like a stone wall. Jack leaned against his hand. He spoke menacingly without changing his expression about his business, which should not be interfered with. Jack's eyes blazed. He didn't understand who he was or where such a big guy came from. Camilla looked at the caller's phone but didn't dare pick it up, so she continued to hypnotize. Channing, sitting on the couch, raised his hand, not understanding why she was not answering Jack's calls and messages. But the girl was indignant and lied about spam. Besides, there was no reason for her not to answer the guy. She picked up the phone and closed her eyes, snapping at the guy. She opened her blue eyes, worried that Jack had been gone for so long, looked at the phone in her hand, and didn't understand those messages either. At this time, the character was drawing his sword when a thug blocked his path, and the girl was carried away on his shoulder. Without straightening up, the hero asked about this man and warned that if he stepped aside, no charges would be brought. The guy's words had no effect. He raised his fist over him, shouted that it was time to die. He realized that he was not the kind of person with whom one could come to an agreement. The man's weakness was in his strength, so the attacker was slow. While he was trying to hit the boy, Jack ended up behind him. But he swung, turned sharply. The guy just prepared his sword for a blow. His fist flashed in the air. The sword and fist clashed. An explosion was heard. Purple light poured out. The battle continued. The character realized that mana was invested in the attack. Otherwise, he would not have been able to stop the sword, and wondered if he was also a hero. The girl was already being loaded into the minivan. Jack glanced sideways at what was happening behind him. He gritted his teeth. If the boy didn't hurry, he would miss them. This couldn't be allowed. He made a decision. The thug got angry. He didn't like that the young man was turning around and looking away from him. He waved his hand. He had no choice. He didn't want to fight at full strength. He tried to keep the damage to a minimum since they were in a residential area. I heard a voice from somewhere above. There was a man standing there in glowing purple. He couldn't allow the whole area to be destroyed. The blonde boy stood with his hands in his pockets, smiling. Jack was lucky. They were in a hurry. Usually they kill all the witnesses, but they didn't have time to play with him. The character raised his sword. His thoughts were mixed up in his head. Everything was about power. They use it together. Then the guy in the light-colored suit turned to the thug and reminded him of the order. He had to behave more quietly. It was his first job, but there was so much trouble. Having heard the words about the boss, the bully had to retreat. It was not funny. He smashed the stonework with his hand in rage. Everything became covered in dust. The young man covered himself with his hand, heard a farewell to him. They promised a quick meeting. When he looked, there was no one there anymore. Everyone had left. Even Jack was confused by this. Putting the knife back into its sheath, I realized that those strange individuals had simply run away, but their identity remained a mystery. Something was wrong. He didn't like it, so now he followed the car that was taking the girl away. I continued to analyze their path, and just then I heard a call. Picked up the phone. It was Camilla calling. She was already on her way by taxi to the place that the guy sent her to. He also told about the kidnapping of a young hybrid girl. His surprised friend asked again. The hero followed them, so he asked the girl to call the police. She agreed, asking for caution. After he switched off, she froze, stared at the phone, held it in her hands for a long time, thinking. She frowned. Pain appeared in her eyes. Someone of another species had been kidnapped. There had been a surge in interspecies hate crimes lately. Meanwhile, the young man stopped in front of the building. It was already dark outside. He found those he was following. I saw that truck too. There was a guy in it wearing a mask. He folded his arms across his chest, sleeping, not noticing anything. I opened one eye, was attracted by the noise, and thought that the guys had already returned. How wrong I was. Jack, flashing blue, knocked on the car window, causing the boy to be shocked by this. He quickly started typing something on his phone, shaking with fear, swore, and didn't understand how he was able to find them. The hero was indignant. He didn't hear him knocking on the window or pretended not to hear. His eyes began to glow even more brightly. The boy trembled even more and asked to wait, because he was a hero and could explain everything. Unable to bear it, Jack pulled the young man out and grabbed him by the chest, closed his eyes from the pain and screamed. He admitted that he saw a crime. He has the power to arrest and decide whether he will live at all. He demanded an explanation of what was going on there. He didn't understand. And in the room, there were many different creatures, tied at the hands on their knees, sitting on the ground. A man in a black suit was carrying someone wrapped in a bag on his shoulder. The seriousness of the situation was frightening. The other guy folded his arms across his chest. A smile appeared on his lips. The special item they picked up today was very impressive. She fell to the floor, a hybrid of a human and a cat. She was ordered by a VIP client. Fear appeared in her yellow eyes. Having removed the gag from her mouth, the girl screamed in pain and resentment, fearing for her life and the unknown of what would happen next. She begged the men to let her go, but they laughed at that and were glad that she was in good spirits. She raised her head and started talking about money, maybe giving away everything she had. And the laughter grew even louder. She worked hard all summer to earn money. He agreed with her this time and nodded. He raised his hand and admitted that it was a pittance compared to what was promised for it. He grabbed the girl by the hair, lifted her up towards him and whispered angrily, bringing his face closer. He spoke openly about the experiment on the hybrid. Tears froze in the corners of his eyes and his mouth dropped open from this. But he calmed down. The attitude towards them was different, but it was better to continue than to send him to the slaughterhouse. She looked at the others, who were no longer moving, only covered with a bloody rag. The guy left, waving his hand. They had time before the client arrived. They needed to prepare everything and remove the bags. The girl screamed angrily, raising herself up on her elbows. Their actions are illegal. She started to speak, but the man interrupted her, laughing and asking what they would do to him, not believing the threat. The boy's words were firmly lodged in the hybrid's head, reminding her of what the monsters had done to people. And she lowered her head. The red color illuminated the girl's body. She had nothing to do with it. She didn't want it. She bent over, clenched her teeth as if in pain. I need to get out urgently, even if I go crazy. But the mana is blocked. A man came up from behind and raised his hand as if to strike. He lowered his hand and pressed it to the ground, squeezing it tighter and tighter. The girl didn't understand what was happening. A smile flashed on his rough face. He told about the mana suppressor, which is very effective on hybrids, and took all precautions. The man in the shirt stopped the guy. There was no point in damaging the goods, but he stood his ground. He was sure that hybrids were nothing but trouble. He just turned his head and said something about the message. The girl needs to be taken to the living room, and if she starts to pass out again, then it's worth knocking her out. But the words got stuck. Something strange at the top attracted the attention of the young people. They raised their heads. There was a crack. The ceiling fell to the floor. Dust rose up, and people covered their mouths with their hands. Jack appeared, glowing blue, his hand clenched into a fist, and announced that he was arresting them on charges of illegal alien trafficking and kidnapping. The guy in the suit turned around and explained about the hero. He had already seen him. The leader flared up. He should have known this. The character saw tied-up, trembling people. The culprits were just those guys. He looked around. The situation was even worse than he thought. At first, he wanted the police to deal with them, but with the chaos going on, he changed his mind. He lowered his head, his eyes filled with blue light, pulling his sword out of its sheath. They are monsters more than all the others. A man in a shirt fell to the floor. Just forgiveness. They were just following orders. Their boss is holding them by the throat. The guy stood up and decisively asked about the main one. He needed to find him. He laughed unexpectedly loudly and angrily, rising. He would not answer like that. It was indicative. He gave the order, and our character was surrounded by several men with swords in their hands from different sides. As soon as the blow was struck, the boys' swords clashed. But the hero was not there. Jack was already on top, crouching in the air, mocking them, cursing. The boy landed and realized that they had used cover so that he wouldn't see them and they would attack in a crowd. So he rushed forward, trying to attack the man. A sword appeared behind him with a sword over his head and was about to crush him. He flashed his sword, scattered blue light, his concentrated face closely watching the guy's actions. Falling one after another, the man in the shirt watched, hands in his pockets, as the attacker's hand fell and no longer moved. It was impossible. The hero knocked down all the people. All of them were no weaker than the fifth-rank heroes, slowly moving towards the leader. There was no escape. All the men fell down in blood and dirt, groaning in pain. their eyes closed. He ran up to the girl, tore the gag from her mouth. Her frightened eyes watched her attentively, and she exhaled a question. Jack looked at her with warmth. He was here to help her. Now she was free, he reassured her. Untying her hands, he continued his speech. The police were already on their way. He wanted to hear the story of what had happened. She looked around, at the people who were covering the blood-soaked cloth. Jack apologized. He was truly sorry. They couldn't survive. The hybrid's eyes stopped at one point. She raised her head and screamed loudly and heart-rendingly. Tears gushed from her eyes. She did not understand such treatment of them. They didn't ask to give birth to them. Everyone treats them like monsters. The hero couldn't help but utter a word. He just lowered his head. Deep down, he knew there was nothing he could do. The police surrounded the room. They were transmitting information. Camilla was there too. With a frown on her forehead, which was cut with wrinkles, the girl looked ahead with longing and anticipation. Two people were making small talk, sitting and drinking tea, one thanking the other for his time. Michael raised his glass, praising the samples that were sent to him. They almost learned to control the mana crystal. The dark figure poured liquid, heard about the commotion, but the stranger already knew that the police were prowling the farm. Unfortunately, there were many important materials there that would help in the investigation. Because of this, the supplies were delayed. I didn't know if it was a coincidence, but it was the same person who managed to defeat the saber-toothed cat. Jack brought out the hybrid, carefully covering him with a blanket and holding him. Michael grinned, glowing purple as he held out the glass, taking care of everything himself. The police reported by radio that 12 children had been saved, but the rest were not so lucky. Jack stood with the men and pointed, telling them about the incident, and they listened to him attentively. A voice came from behind. Hearing it, he turned around sharply. His attentive, stern gaze warmed. I saw Camilla, who was carefully looking away. She was ashamed in front of the boy. Coming closer to her, he stopped, without removing his hand from his chest, and asked him about his affairs, anxiously peering into his face. He turned his gaze to the side, to where the men were removing the corpses. Unfortunately, they hadn't been able to save everyone, he noted with regret. He said that someone had died before the boy arrived. Camila also looked in the direction she was interested in the criminals, but they were alive. But they were all arrested, and the police took up the matter. The girl's eyes flashed blue with displeasure. The character bowed his head. It was the first time he had seen such quiet rage on the girl's face, but he understood her condition perfectly well, because she was also a hybrid. But the best decision was to leave these bastards alive, since the hero suspected that this warehouse was not just there. The guy turned to Jack. No one else will appear in this warehouse, but he heard a conversation about a VIP client. This needs to be looked into. I saluted him with my hand and sent the boys home. But there was something else that required attention. Jack stared in anticipation. One of the victims wanted to see him. The boy finished his speech hesitantly. The same girl who had been saved by the character was sitting in the car, nervously fiddling with her dress. When she stood with the members of the Fun Guild, she apologized to them. But the guys assured her that everything was fine and that they were happy with this format. The girl with the ears wanted to be taken home instead of staying with the police, she gasped, looking up. The orphanage was a place where young and vulnerable members of various species who had come to Earth from other worlds were kept. It operated like a normal orphanage, providing everything they needed until they reached adulthood. Jack glanced sideways at the little girl. He had heard of such a place, but he had no idea that the species that grew up in this place were also targets for kidnapping. A woman came out to meet them, putting her hands to her chest, tears rolling down her cheeks, and screamed the girl's name with pain. Unable to bear it any longer, Ricky ran to the woman and burst into her arms, hugging her tightly. She began to apologize, stroking her head soothingly and hugging her even tighter. Mrs. Jolie closed her eyes. She raised her head. The woman did not notice the young people at first. Jack assured her that there was no need to worry. The warm meeting pleased him. She introduced herself as Jolie. She was the director of the orphanage. She was already aware of the whole situation. The police called her today. After her words, the woman bowed to the guild members. She didn't know how to thank them for saving Rika. Camilla covered her eyes with her hands. Because it was their duty. The suggestion was made to have some tea. The guys looked at each other, agreeing with her completely. And so our heroes set off along the long, white corridor, looking around, turning their heads, following Mrs. Jolie. Jack turned to the woman, was struck by the silence, the first time this had happened in an orphanage. She turned around and explained that the children were already asleep. But as soon as she spoke about the dream, the children looked out from behind the doorway, ran out crying to meet the girl. Jolie threw up her hands. It was late and time for them to go to bed. But the kids were already surrounding and hugging Ricky. The young man laughed. He thought it was cute. The woman smiled too, and her eyes sparkled with warmth. The girl took the kids away. We can continue without her. The guy was amazed that even after everything, she kept a courageous face. They sat down on soft sofas. The director apologized for the children. They had too much energy. But the hero was glad that they remained children despite everything. The woman told how she was contacted, and then she accidentally shared with the children. So they were worried and did not sleep. Camila asked about the other victims. The boy looked at her with surprise. Ricky was the only one involved in this incident. The other children were from neighboring institutions. The girl interrupted, remembered another similar incident, and stared in anticipation. But then their conversation was interrupted. Camilla turned her head towards the speaker and froze. Her blue eyes widened. A girl with red hair and eyes came in with a tray in her hands. Layla thanked Jolie, set out cups for the guests, and they looked at each other. The girl quietly clarified about the people the director had spoken about earlier, nodded, and the boys carefully watched what was happening. Now Layla was also surprised, bowed, and expressed gratitude for saving Ricky, nervously fiddling with her hands. The director's speech was heard. She said that this girl also experienced something similar. 4 years ago, 2 children from the orphanage were kidnapped. Layla returned home, but the other child was less lucky. Camila slammed her hands on the table in anger. Jack remained calm and expressed sympathy. The woman heard about help, shook her head from side to side. She didn't need anything, but she appreciated the attempt. I remembered that there were guilds that also offered help, constantly promising financial support, and that there would be a place where all species could live in harmony. But in reality, no one cared about them when they really needed help. Looked at the red-haired girl when she was kidnapped. Only one large guild came to their aid. Asked again with interest. And this guild was a bone with the head Don. Without him, they would not have been able to find Layla. The guy was dejected. This was even before the hero became the leader. Before that, he only brought trouble. Then, many species harbored resentment and anger towards the heroes, which caused considerable tension. The real dilemma is that despite the fact that it is about helping those in need, there remains a significant conflict of interest. Jolie lowered her head. Given their current situation, they are not yet able to independently determine what is best for their home, appreciates the refraction, but will not be able to accept any more help. Camilla raised her hands to her hair, revealing her ears. There was no need to worry about this. The woman was confused. She showed her sharp ears, explained to the woman that she was only half human. Layla screamed and covered her mouth with her hand. Jolie was also surprised. She considered the girl the head of the fun guild. She closed her eyes and lowered her head. There was nothing wrong with that, even though her guild was created by a half-elf. She raised her head and began to speak passionately about how, growing up, she had faced discrimination solely because of her elf nature, and remembered a period in her life when she had withdrawn from the world and looked at everything through the prism of bitterness, fearing those who despised her for who she was. She looked at Jack with a slight smile. Then she realized and continued her speech that there are people who choose understanding over prejudice. They can really change the situation for the better. She turned to the director, who was also the same person, and raised her head. The woman opened her mouth in amazement. Jolie felt something, as if the wind of change had touched her too. These guys could change some things, and this breeze of hope blew to the one who was thirsty for change. Ricky spied and eavesdropped with trepidation in her soul. After the conversation, Camilla bowed to Jack, asked him for forgiveness, but there was no need to apologize, was his answer. The girl had promised the largest donation they could accept, so now she was scolding herself for her words. Despite all this, the guy admired that today the girl behaved like a real guild leader and would support her until she did something dangerous. The girl was embarrassed, raised her hands to her face, her cheeks turned red, and tears glistened in her eyes. She breathed out the guy's name, but then she folded her arms across her chest and noted with displeasure that she didn't understand the reason for meeting with Mika. It hurt more than she thought. They interrupted her again. Ricky ran towards them. The guys looked at her, stared in anticipation. The hybrid was in a hurry, nervously fiddling with her hands, afraid that she had missed her, breathing heavily, and her eyes were burning with determination. Jack spoke up, asked the reason for their appearance. The girl bent over to catch her breath. She had something for them, straightened up, pressed her hands to her chest, thanked again for saving her. Because of the shock, she had not been able to thank him properly earlier. I closed my eyes. Tears streamed from my eyes, and I found the strength to move on only because of the guys. The young people listened to her attentively. The girl wanted to give a gift, Camilla asked politely. Immediately, a gentle blue light illuminated them all. She pulled out an artifact of the world that Ricky considered her home. Jack's eyes became the same color as the artifact in his hand. Surprise was reflected on his face. She put her hand on Camille's shoulder and explained what this object was with admiration in her voice. Camilla folded her arms across her chest in displeasure and was indignant. Unable to believe that Jack seriously wanted to invite Mika, he reasonably noted that the fourth-rank guild should attract new talents. Extended his hand, covering his eyes. The guy stood his ground. The girl thought that they weren't on a date then. She closed her eyes and felt awkward. She had been wrong all this time. She sat down, still holding her hands on her chest. She didn't believe that they could hire someone like a tamer. But it was worth a try, the young man assured. She pointed her finger. After thinking it over, this would be the first and last time. Everything else is negotiable. She coughed into her hand, leaned over, and at this point she considered the conversation over. But there was one more thing left. A gift from Ricky. The girl asked when they would be able to use it. He was confused. He took out that crystal. The girl brought it from far away. Camilla waved her hand. Apparently there was more power in it than in all those 100 that were found. Jack admitted that he could have passed it on to his spirit, but thought it might be a good learning opportunity. She asked again in surprise, not understanding a bit about the training. But the guy was already absorbed in something else. A blue lump flew out of his chest. The boy screamed and followed it with his eyes, uncomprehending. I calmed my spirit. There was nowhere to hide in this place. The girl still stood there discontentedly. The spirit flickered in the air. The boys watched it, and Jack noticed with displeasure that his head hurt from the flickering. Camilla thought in shock. She couldn't believe that she was talking to a spirit like that. She saw the closeness between them. He pointed his hand at the mana crystal, lured the blue flame, tempted it with power. The ball jumped up to the crystal, but the hero stopped it with his hand. Not so quickly. He remembered the incident in the Cost Guild and that awkwardness too. He stopped the ball with 2 fingers and scolded him. If this continues, he will not receive the crystal of power, the spirit growled. Giving commands and watching the spirit carry them out, Camilla frowned, not expecting the guy to teach strictly. Remembering the relationship between mother and spirit, there they were more friendly. But here they are different, like with a pet. She closed her eyes, clenched her fist, and started to cry. But the blue ball chose its owner. Jack praised the spirit, even allowed him to eat the mana crystal, and smiled. Everything around was illuminated with blue light. The reaction was much stronger. I assumed that this was because the spirit absorbed more mana. Don's words came to mind. Falling somewhere down. The guy plunged into some kind of reality, heard a voice. Trying to look around, warned an unfamiliar voice about empty excitement. Jack was inside the virtual space. I swam closer, didn't understand what was happening, and didn't know that the spirit could speak. Thanked for the crystal. I noticed that the sphere began to disintegrate. I was worried about the spirit. I didn't know the reason for the conversation. He revealed the secret. Someone is following them. The boy was surprised. He didn't think that someone knew. Then the spirit said that with the help of the crystal of power, one can become stronger. Anyone who uses crystals can do this. The voice warned about the environment. It is worth taking a closer look at everyone. Sometimes those whom we trust the most hide the most from us, Jack screamed. He couldn't get his head around the fact that someone nearby was a traitor. But the hero himself would have to find out. He heard about Camilla's defense. He cried out even louder. The successor was chosen for this. He got angry. They pushed everything onto him. Without understanding, the guy cried out in resentment. Too little time was given for the meeting. Beads of sweat streamed down his face. The girl anxiously asked about her health. He whispered her name. The boy began to move away from what he had experienced. The young man found himself on the floor, rising as he heard the worry in Camilla's voice. Raising himself up on his elbows, he told her who he had met, and she asked again as if she had misheard. He looked down, didn't know how to explain, and tried to understand what had just happened. The boys raised their heads and saw a glow under the ceiling that began to take the form of a creature. Jack realized that the spirit looked like a little girl, who appeared next to him. Some people in the room were doing something with chemicals. 2 men were standing waiting. The experiment was conducted. Those familiar personalities were constantly watching Michael. As he poured out the liquid, he heard that the kidnapping of the last hybrid had not gone according to plan. Because of this, they lost a large supply base. The business partners' faith began to weaken, and the experiment began to grow before their eyes. Then the fair-haired man could not remain silent. Began to talk about carefully reconnoitering the area, did not destroy because they were afraid to expose themselves. The aura thickened above him. The creator scolded, reminding him for what purposes the personalities were created. Michael turned around, demanded Jack's head, gritted his teeth, his eyes flashed purple. His attorneys agreed, nodded in agreement, understood their task, and realized what they needed to do. Another man ran in, throwing open the door. It slammed loudly and he shouted about problems. The heroes walked, their eyes flashing with displeasure, burst in and began to grab everyone in a row. Earlier, Don had called Ben to his place, who had appeared promptly and was now standing by the door, waiting. The head of the guild turned around and noted with a smile that he knew about what had happened on the territory of the monsters. Ben didn't consider what happened then a victory. They just cleaned up there, and the monster was almost defeated. He had something to sort out before heading to work. Ben kept his head down. Rising from his seat, Don began evasively from afar, knowing that this would not be a very pleasant assignment. We need to arrest the manager Michael, and all his subordinates as well. The association did not give permission for this, but Don made this decision. He called for risk, but if they acted according to protocol, they would never be caught. But most importantly, he put his hands in his pockets and warned about the rat in the association. Ben asked incredulously. It was hard to believe that there were people who collaborated with Michael, compared, and there must be a connection between recent cases where heroes were drawn into dubious incidents. Does not see any reason to unite with guilds. He warned me in a friendly manner about a possible setup, a premonition that they might be planning something worse. And now, listening to the voice that reached him, which insisted on innocence, he squinted his eyes with displeasure. Seeing one man arrest another, I recalled the words prejudice about illegal actions. He listened to the reports from his team. The people who worked here were just workers. But Ben was only interested in Michael. The man who was on the floor whispered about their imminent death as soon as the main thing was found out. It became interesting, the man asked. But the guy turned around and whispered about death with his crazy purple eyes. He asked again about them, demanding that they speak directly and not vaguely. Having heard about the blessed ones, his face darkened, deciding that this was precisely connected with what the manager had planned. The members of the Run Guild were convinced that they were faced with a fanatic and that he was talking nonsense. The guy suggested that they move on. The guys tensed up, the aura became thicker, they felt something approaching. The man stopped short of starting his speech. Having finished the sentence, the members of 2 people saw that they were walking, carrying with them something terrible and scary. The giant, who was among Michael's backing singers with a determined look, demanded that every single one of the heroes be killed. The fair-haired man flashed his yellow eyes, grinned. He had already seen these faces. Everything suited him. Just as he was looking for someone to vent his anger on, a figure was approaching. The young men did not understand what was happening. The strength of the men was like the mana of monsters, but they recognized this fact very dangerously. Ben turned to them. He was interested in Michael, so he asked about him. His eyes acquired dark specks. An evil grin flashed on his lips. The guy admitted that he knew where, but wanted to know the reason why they needed him. He rushed towards them, talking along the way about the future fate of those present. The girl rushed forward first, pulled out her sharp blade and cast a spell. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed some movement. The tension was growing and fear was slowly taking hold. I noticed how the men were grabbed by the waist, gasping for breath, asking and begging for help. The guy put his hand in his pocket and held out the other with a smirk on his lips, confident in his strength and actions. The girl screamed that help would be provided now, and she was about to. But behind her, there was already a thug with a raised fist. But the hooded guy who came forward put out his hand and blocked the attack easily. Another young man was already flying at the big guy from above, his leg extended to strike, attacking in mid-jump. Together, they managed to lay the man on the stone floor, crushing him with stones. The strong blow even caused a crack in the floor. The blond man saw that his partner had been defeated, but nothing else was expected under the leadership of a strong guild. Realizing that Michael had already escaped, Ben rushed to attack the boy who stood with a disfigured back. The man was confident in his abilities. He flew at the guy and grinned. There was no time for distraction. A swing of the sword and the young man fell apart, without even having time to say anything. In a moment, the end came. Michael's backup singer cursed, not expecting the man in front of him to be so fast. After the blonde boy's defeat, Ben stood over him and thought, "The reports were wrong. The individuals were stronger than they thought," the man said smugly about the rookie mistake, the loss of vigilance. He turned to his men who were running towards him, asked about the leader, but it was all in vain. Ben suggested finishing this here, demanded the latest news about the wounded, but then he froze. The man's face changed, circles appeared under his eyes, and the realization inevitably overtook him. The lying guy grinned, reminded him of his words, and turned over his shoulder. The brute was already on his feet, surprised that the first one was still lying down, presented him with liquid in a bottle, calling it a blessing. The bubble landed on the grinning boy's wet tongue. His eyes sparkled. He was lucky today. The others, too. They would be able to see the second blessing. Camilla and Jack stopped near a large building and looked around the place carefully. Then they looked at each other. The construction seemed to be finished, they decided. The guy spoke about the Earth Mage. They were met by a woman who cheerfully greeted the members of the Fun Guild. The secretary held the tablet close to her, showed interest, and curiously asked about the purpose of the visit. The young people straightened up, wanted to see the head of the Dawn Guild, and were now waiting for an answer. But, unfortunately, he was not there. Jack was upset. He wanted to talk about his spirit. Asked the girl to tell him that they were there. The secretary cordially agreed with them, but her words were caught on her lips as she was interrupted by the young man running towards her. He was shouting anxiously that the connection with Ben's team had been cut off. They had received information from them earlier, but were still in the lab. The woman sweated. The information was not for outsiders. She tried to tell the boy this and fell silent. A man interrupted. Having heard part of the conversation, he became anxious and wanted an explanation. Sitting in the helicopter, the guys anxiously learned new things about both the laboratory and Michael. With her hands folded on her knees, the guild secretary Cost warned of top secrecy. Leaning forward slightly, she said that not long ago, the Hero Association ordered all guilds to conduct a joint investigation into Michael's activities, and the main person being hunted is the manager. He is suspected of being behind the recent incidents with the creation of various monsters. The information was passed on to everyone, including the top 6. The plan was for the heads to conduct an investigation within a few days. Then Camilla asked a reasonable question about the actions of the Coast Guild, and inquired about the reason for acting separately from the others. The secretary explained it this way. Their leader doesn't trust the guilds. These joint operations usually create a lot of unnecessary friction, so they took matters into their own hands and started an investigation. And for that same reason, they sent Ben's team to the office. Embarrassed, she raised her eyes over her glasses. Everyone understood correctly. The only thing they could do was not finish the sentence. She raised her head, surprised by the words from the guy. She didn't expect to hear that Jack would take everything upon himself. He put his hand on the window. They are still a new guild and no one will suspect them. Since there are 2 of them, it will be easy to get in. He raised his hand and his eyes flashed. The young man was calculating all the options. In the open door, the guy turned around and looked at the girl, asked her to prepare levitation. She was confused, could not believe that she wanted to jump. The hero stopped. There was no time to think. Jack flew forward, but the girl could only shout that time was needed to prepare the ability. Ben, covered in wounds and blood, lowered his head. His hair covered his eyes, and without raising his head, he chuckled. Then he raised his head, looked around the room, couldn't understand where he was and what was happening. He started spinning, couldn't even comprehend whether he was alive. What he saw horrified him. The once living members of the team were now lying around like broken dolls. They were all dead, Ben screamed loudly and heartrendingly, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't know how this happened. He stopped short, looked at himself, or rather at his hand, which was not there. Suddenly fell silent and stared. Howling, Ben blamed himself. Spreading his arms, the blonde monster grinned and lectured, remembering his own words. He gave the command to his partner, and the big guy transformed and now looked like an animal. Ben saw that the man's body had merged with the monster and realized what was happening. Dumbfounded, he decided that he should tell Don no matter what. He turned to the lying guy with a pathetic attempt, with the hope that he was alive. The guy was still alive. He closed his eyes, couldn't move, and sadly began to apologize to Ben. Because he was the protection. He had to protect everyone. The man cried out, asking to be silent. He couldn't cry because his eyes were damaged. He believed that the guild would send reinforcements. The youth touched his eyes. He didn't care now. He wouldn't survive. He demanded to drop it and run while he still could. The boy would hold off as long as possible. All the words were said. The man stopped short, froze, could not move. It even seemed like time stood still. The boy was defeated by that monster gorilla, Ben roared, cursed, and leaned forward. He sped forward to attack, but was intercepted by a huge paw that grew in his path. The monster that killed the boy rushed forward, waving its paws, and threw the commander back. The blow was strong. The man could not bear it and screamed. His forehead was cut into wrinkles. His eyes rolled back from unbearable pain. The fair-haired boy slowly approached them, grinning, revealing the secret that they had long ago received information about the hero's plans. Unexpectedly for all of them, a couple appeared, moving to the side, attracting the attention of the villain. Camila looked around the room, pressed her hand to her lips. "We need reinforcements. We need medical help." Before Jack could say anything about the end, a thug in the form of a gorilla rushed towards them, remembering the boss's words about the youth's head. The blonde boy screamed in a pathetic attempt to get his partner back, swore, his face becoming more and more changed. He didn't hear him. Already completely captivated by the goal, his eyes flashed purple and he jumped on the hero. He asked Camilla not to interfere. Let her stay safe, together with the spirit. A little girl with wings appeared on the open palm. He rushed into the attack, his eyes flashing, a sword already in his hands, swinging it, determination in his gaze. The boy felt a huge force from the spirit, deftly wielding the sword, dodging attacks and using the extreme spell, the Blade of Aura, controlling the elements, a type of magic that allows you to use the forces of nature. But only if we talk about real control of the elements. Elemental magic, born from a real connection with an elemental, works on a completely different level. For Jack, getting close to the elements was an easy task because he had one big problem. This character was weak. Unlike some heroes who were born with natural magical abilities, every time the guy used his abilities, he put his life on the line. So without power, he used as little as possible. But now, it's different. You can use elemental mana together with your own. The sword appeared in his hands again. He rushed into the attack, his eyes sparkling. The sword also took on a blue glow. The guy was no longer constrained by restrictions. He prepared to use his power. And in this way, he became a real air elemental. The fair-haired half-man, half-monster watched the hero, cursed, and did not understand what was happening here. Jack was able to kill such a strong monster with one blow and sent it lying in a crevice on the floor. The gorilla changed back into human form, whispered about the hero, and the guy cut him in half. Jack towered over him. The giant's words about the boss's order could be heard. A little girl, the spirit Sylph, fluttered nearby. He looked carefully and was interested in the power of the purple color, which can only be seen in mutated monsters. Ahead, the boy saw that bright boy, and Jack realized that he had merged with the mutated monsters. I also remembered a small skirmish in that small alley, where our paths had already crossed. He failed to finish him off then, but this time he will not leave, he promised, watching every move of the villain. The sword appeared in his hands again. He rushed into the attack, his eyes sparkling. The sword also took on a blue glow. The monster clenched his teeth in impotent rage. The hero was too strong, he understood, and facing him face to face now would definitely be a death sentence. But the boss's order about Jack's head came to mind. I imagined what would happen to him. I clenched my teeth, and there was a crack. He looked at the man's body. He could use it. He stopped, froze. He grabbed the modified hand. Ben hung in the air and began to blackmail the guy. Camila screamed, angry, raised her hand, took the man hostage. He smugly raised his hand, warned the guys about one more move and would wring his neck. I couldn't let that happen, so I lowered my weapon, asked them to let me go, and then they would retreat. Continuing to smile, he was glad that they had managed to come to an agreement. It had seemed too easy to him that everything had gone well, and he praised himself. I thought that by this time the boss should understand that everything is not going as planned. The rest will appear any minute. He just needs to hold the heroes here. Jack was there. Now it was his turn to laugh. He couldn't believe that he actually fell for it. The guy recoiled, gritted his teeth. Unexpectedly for him, the boy was acting cunningly, attacking the man. He didn't think that he was so trusting, pressing on him, holding a sword in his hands. He handled the sword deftly. A swing here, a cut there, and the monster was cut to pieces. One half of the body fell away from the other. Not understanding, he was in his second form, and he was cut down with one blow. The gnashing of teeth was heard by everyone, and the upper part of the monster flew to the floor in frustration. The sharp blade pressed against the guy's face, and the shining eyes of the half-human, half-monster creature began to fade. The young man towered over the monster, asking him again now, pressing with his blade while waiting for an answer. The hero was interested in what Michael was planning. Half of the person could still live, he grinned. The blade came closer and closer, clarified the question, demanded details. The smile became stronger. Now he understands why he sees a threat in him. He admitted that the boss wanted to kill him, but the boy should think about joining them. They could come up with something. Seduced him. Even said that there are already several heroes who were blessed, because he could even be powerful. Our boy remained unapproachable. He had no time. He demanded to answer questions. The monster laughed, convinced that he was dealing with an ignorant child, and that the boss's plan was already working. He will find out soon enough. Camilla leaned over the trembling Ben, touched him. The girl tried to call him. Anxiety was reflected on her face. The man's body was increasingly overcome by trembling. Opening his eyes, he saw a girl, recognized a member of the Fun Guild, and asked to get them out of here. He felt awkward, raising himself with the help of Camilla, because he was the organizer at the exam. She stopped the bleeding. There was no need to make unnecessary movements. I didn't feel the strength of one of them. I returned to the lying position again, and asked about the murder. The girl reassured him that if Jack took care of the half-monsters, there was no need to worry or think. But the man started arguing, looked somewhere to the side. He felt enormous power from one of them. One of them was still alive. The power was much stronger than in those two. A figure appeared behind the guy. Eyes lit up. He heard a quiet voice. His eyes flashed and he tensed up, pressing his lips tightly together. A female voice corrected him. The hero froze, holding his sword forward. Not knowing who she was, he cursed. The girl was embarrassed, touched her cheeks. She liked the relaxed look of the character, to her taste, but at the same time easily blocked his sword. Having thrown the guy aside, she was not a simple person. She demonstratively cleaned her weapon while looking at the boy. She pointed a dagger at him, admitted that the young man was quite handsome, and laughed about her offer to become her boyfriend. She promised to take good care of him, but the guy looked back at her and refused such a tempting offer. Jerry was annoyed by this answer, But she smiled and chuckled to herself. Coming closer to the lying man, she joked about a cold. He asked her for another chance, begged. She sat down next to him and sadly noticed that he had already used 2 crystals, and the experiments couldn't handle more than 2. He held out his hand in a pitiful attempt, asking for another chance and help. He could defeat him, he was sure. She laughed, plunged the blade, everything lit up red. She hated to repeat it. For people who can't fight, there is no second chance. And the boy's eyes faded, the purple color gradually fading from his face. She pulled out the dagger. A smile lit up her face again, and turned to the guy, saying that he only had 1 chance. Jerry straightened up, holding her side with her hand. The boy and Sylph stared at her. Unable to bear it, Jack asked about the side. It seemed to him that all these modified creatures were on one side. She brought the dagger to her nose, scratched it, and laughed. There was pity in the guy's voice. It was a useless thing, was the answer. She explained what kind of people like that bright boy were, then pointed the blade at the hero. She was tired of talking. She was too angry at the people who couldn't shut up, so she jumped up and rushed at the guy. Using the power of spirit, I made him bare his fangs and smile from such a surprise. And I also paid attention to the eccentric little animal. Throwing Jerry away from himself, it flew past, leaving dust. Jack watched, slightly lowering his sword. They exchanged glances with the spirit. It seemed like it was just empty chatter, they decided. Everything seemed strange. He looked around in search of Camilla. He had to return to her. There could be more such creatures nearby. Already turning around to leave, I heard a voice that was grinning and oozing with poison. Jerry stood up, her red eye flashing, a smile glued to her lips. She hadn't met anyone with such a sparkle in a long time. She gave him a compliment, as if she had fallen for the hero. He turned around, thoughtfully wondering, because the character knew for sure that the blow hit the target. He didn't want to kill anyone, but there was no other choice. He saw how the girl was already rushing towards him. She still hadn't played enough. The young man gave the order to Sylph that it was worth returning to the sword. The blue ball obediently flashed. The next trick was shown by the Donka. When Jack cut it and froze in anticipation, his eyes sparkling. And while our hero was wondering where Jerry had gone, she appeared behind him and was already aiming a dagger at his neck. He turned sharply, blocked the blow with his sword, staggered, and his blue eye flared. If it weren't for his analysis, it would have been much worse. The style is good, almost like an assassin's. He was sure that she wouldn't be able to dodge the next blow. But when they were so close, she was able to duck away from the blow. She managed to get away, bounced off the boy, took a pose for an attack. I have never seen such movements anywhere else. She straightened up. Blood dripped from the cut on her forehead. It was too close. She could have died, she confessed. Then she realized that it wasn't so easy to defeat the guys. It became clear to Jack that if he didn't deal with her now, she would become a problem in the future. He decided to use the aura blade again. He didn't want the attack to reach Camilla. She grinned, acknowledged the guy's professionalism. She had never seen anyone use aura. They rushed into the attack. The girl shouted about her dagger and that he was ready to accept, wherever it was. The guy was silent. He just decided to destroy the place. Then he would see how Jerry would cope. The battle was stopped by a high-pitched male voice, who stood with his back to him in a relaxed pose. I scolded Jerry for starting a fight. She just needed to assess the situation. He adjusted his glasses and said hello. It was that same manager Michael. He put one hand to his chest, put the other in his pocket, introduced himself as a man, and flashed the white light of his glasses. The girl turned around and waved her hand. The hero carefully examined the man. It was the first time he had seen the manager, and now Damashka wondered about the reason for his arrival. She came closer to the main thing, put her hands on her hips, expressed her opinion, argued with her, saw the mess that she made. They turned their gaze to the dead. The girl leaned over, chimed in about the death of the experiment, and complained about demanding more. Michael looked down on the remains and called this creature stupid and impudent. He ordered to take the crystals of power from their bodies and leave. She snorted and turned away, wanting to stay longer. Jack put his sword to the man's throat and announced his arrest because he was a criminal. He continued that the Hero Association had sent reinforcements. There was no need to do anything. Just surrender. Throwing his head back, he laughed evilly. This was what Michael had hoped for. This was all part of his plan. The purple color illuminated everyone present. Laughter still came from the man. The hero was confused. Jack couldn't stand it. He leaned on his sword. The aura thickened and wrote, "Too dense. No person should have such powerful mana." He heard, raised his head, told about his plan, attracted all the members of the 6 guilds. He cried out that only a fool would agree to something like this. He looked down at the guy with a smile and agreed that they wouldn't dance to his tune. But the girl chimed in with her own comment. When the suggestion about the traitor was made, Jack fell silent in shock, his eye blazing. I imagine a man sitting in the office and sorting through documents, sorting out the necessary sheets. The chairman of the Association of Heroes looked at his wristwatch and decided for himself that it was time. Coming out of his office, looking back at the door and quietly closing it, the man was in a hurry. The head of the guild, Koss Dawn, appeared in front of him. He put his hands in his pockets and watched the guy closely. He winced slightly, found the traitor, and now asked how he was doing. In such a tone that the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He nervously touched his glasses, pretended not to know what was being discussed, and even tried to turn it into a joke. Dawn didn't try to prove anything. He just went and dumped a nearby stone wall on him. And the man fell. He grimaced and began to say that the one who can control all the heads of the guilds is the same person who leaks all the information to Michael. Dawn found the rat, leaned forward a little, his eyes flashing with displeasure. Everything led to Eugene. At first, the guy denied it, saying it wasn't him. But he glowed purple, emerging from the stone with sharp nails and pointed features. Dawn smiled, admitted that he hadn't liked this man from the very beginning, and trusted his instincts. The guy's next words did not please the traitor. He grinned and touched his hair with his hand. The chairman had changed, and now presented a new monster to the chief, with wings and horns. That's what Michael's technology can do. He lowered his head slightly, whispered, understandingly crossing a man with a bat, "Mana crystals are mixed in." A smile touched his lips. The era of heroes had sunk into oblivion. He called them relics of the past. Take care of it personally. He will do everything to destroy the heroes. With these words, the traitor ran towards the guy, who was still standing calmly in place. He put his hand forward, paying tribute to the enthusiasm. The head of the guild coast remained calm, but it wasn't enough. A weak blow like everyone else's, but the monster was able to break through his barrier. Even though Dawn dodged it and his hand didn't hit him, he loved to fight in close combat. He tore off the monster's arm. He howled. He never expected such pain. He screamed louder, his arm torn off, his forehead wrinkled in pain, his mouth opened in a scream. He cast a spell. A shadow impulse flowed towards the guy. He put his hands out in defense. The attack on the ultrasound that these evil wings use was similar. The monster rose up, smiling smugly. He made fun of such a glorious warrior as the head of the guild. With his arms outstretched, it was no wonder that his guild members were destroyed like ants. With such a weak leader, they had no chance. Appealed to the feeling of guilt. I stopped short as soon as I heard the guy's words about screeching like a bat. My face changed. Pain flashed in my eyes. He scratched his ear with his finger demonstratively. He didn't like dealing with evil wings. They were too noisy. And there wasn't even a scratch on the hero. He looked through the hole in the wall. They are heroes, Dawn admitted, always ready to risk their lives. He clenched his fist. There was no point in deceiving himself. He was sure that Ben wouldn't give in so easily, especially since he admitted that his little tricks weren't bad. Dawn's face changed. It became angry. A smirk appeared on his lips. He pointed his finger. The monster made him angry. He summoned his elemental, and the traitor watched in shock as it absorbed an entire building. The hand lit up, reminding me of the words I said earlier, calling the heroes outdated. The earthen bonds bound the man. He could not move. But the leader demanded that the chatter continue. This ability uses the elemental power to trap enemies, making it difficult to get out. On a piece of land, Dawn moved and controlled the fetters with his hand. Dark hollows where the eyes should be, and a quiet, growing laugh betrayed the madness of the monster that had once been a man. The man was confused. raised his head and opened his mouth, not understanding the reason for such wild laughter. Without raising his head, the trader began his speech with a grin about how they had made sure that a bunch of heroes, including those from the 6 leading guilds, were expelled from the city. It was time for a real plan. Everything had been done for this. The people who were downstairs and walking around were now looking at their phones and thinking. Someone was walking arm in arm with children. A fair-haired boy was walking next to his mother. People had no idea what was coming. He raised his head and looked somewhere up, anxiously asking what was happening and what it was. The child's mother, smiling, did not understand, did not see where her child was looking, and did not even suspect trouble. But she froze and stopped. Like all the people, a large number of monsters were moving towards them. The trader continued to laugh, baring his teeth. There was no one left in the city to protect him. People were screaming, asking for help. The mother hugged her child tightly and tried to cover him with her body, preparing for imminent death. A female voice sounded like salvation, surprisingly. But monsters do not act on the territory of monsters. Glancing at the family, now safety. Guildmaster Snowball. Claire's eyes flashed. Everything was under control. In some areas, people are still running to escape the advancing creatures. Another head of the Warriors Guild dealt a crushing blow. He was bored of sitting idle. This was the kind of battle he was waiting for. The monsters kept growing in number, but the heroes actively fought them and carried out attacks. The man with red hair, leaning his hand on his sword, did not understand where these monsters came from. The head of the guild, Kiros, pondered this phenomenon. He glanced back, clearly understanding that the creatures had appeared here only because they knew that the heroes would leave the city. Swinging weapons and killing, so be it. He doesn't care who is behind this appearance of monsters. I was pursuing my personal goal. I wanted to reach the next level. That's why I was in this place now. Looking from his place, the chairman in fetters did not understand how so many heroes appeared so quickly. Beads of sweat mixed with tears on the trader's face. Don spoke from behind about his plan to call all the heroes back. A smile flashed on his lips again, and he asked about the other members in Michael's lab. But Don had an answer to this too. He involved the most important person in this task, the one he trusted. The boy looked cheerfully, putting his hands in his pockets. Dean looked with blue, sparkling eyes. This building is too chic. He was happy like a child. Don cheerfully touched his glasses with his hand, as much as it was unpleasant for him to admit it. But the boy was stronger than him. Now glowing with a faint blue light, he landed behind Michael, who glanced sideways at him. The manager and Jerry looked at the new arrival, surprise flashing in their eyes. Dean's eyes flashed, noticing the fun he wasn't invited to. But he came himself. Everyone froze in place in surprise. And after a few seconds, all eyes turned to the unexpectedly appearing hero. The young man, the head of the Red Hall Guild, the best guild in the nation, looked at everyone present. The strongest hero. His mere presence was enough to make the battlefield his. His eyes flashed. He asked about the manager. Michael was surprised by the appearance of a man. Jerry raised her hands to her lips, unable to tear her eyes away. The manager egged him on about saving lives. A slight smile touched his lips. They sent him here. There is someone to take care of it. There is no need to worry. I didn't expect to see Jack either, I greeted him. Don told me a lot and shared a lot. He thoughtfully raised his hand to his face, hoping that he was not on the same team as this worthless person. The guy cried out from this. Jack was barely holding on because of his strength. But Dean walked calmly towards them, strong and powerful. A bluish light lit up in his hand. Despite this, it was as if they were playing different games. I didn't expect that the members of the Coast Guild would drop out of the game, but I still wanted to get even with them and struck a blow. Michael covered himself, surprised by the ability to make dreams come true. Only heard, but not seen until now. Realized that the hero was seriously determined to finish them off. Jerry shouted that now they had a different plan. They should forget about the crystals. They needed to get out immediately. The man warned that they had no choice but to try, and grinned. He raised his staff and the people were trapped, easily and simply. The fragments rushed towards them. Still pointing at those present, they found themselves in the realm of dreams. The boy used spatial magic. Jerry and Michael looked around. They were no longer in the room. The girl whistled. She thought it was romantic. The hero explained that this world, created by him, no one will leave here without permission. Jack watched without changing his position, surprised that a man could create such a thing on his own. The place was similar to the one created by Sylph. Our character conducted an analysis and found out that magic is inherent only to Dean. It can create a world where reality and dreams go hand in hand. Now that the overwhelming mana had disappeared, the boy decided to take action and jumped into the air, raising his sword. Dean leaned over. He admired the hero, attacked as soon as he could move, without further warning. He looked at the guy, was surprised how he ended up here. The boy willingly explained, moved with a slight smile, and finished. He asked him to look to the side, showed what would have happened if he had not intervened. Jack saw how claws grew out of Michael's back. The manager raised his hands to his head. His whole body changed. Eyes appeared on those claws that stuck out of his back, and this picture was terrifying. He took off his glasses. Someday he would still show his second nature. And he had to meet the hero. He used so many monsters to create these tentacles that it was hard to tell them apart. The bizarre appearance a result of him injecting a bunch of power crystals into himself. The end result of all the research Maiko has done over the years is the idea of an absolute fusion of man and monsters. Jack's face darkened. He became curious about how many varieties he had combined into himself. Dean also looked closely at the new monster. A smirk appeared on his lips. He became interested in the backup plan. He turned to the boy, asked him to sit aside, cried out in amazement, did not understand the reason. He started arguing with the hero. He knew he was strong, but even he was not ready for battle. He interrupted him. He asked to just watch, stood near his glass, and told the guy that he would only get in the way in his current state. Meanwhile, Michael had put out his hand and was now studying the trap, looking for a weak spot. If he continues to draw out energy, it will soon be exhausted. The place is doomed to destruction, the manager decided. Without turning his head, Dean threw to Jack. It's worth watching because of the amazing spectacle, because it's not every day that you see something like this. He coughed up blood and was amazed at how much high magic he could release at once. The hero rose above the manager. He was already tired of this story with his healing. The young man was glowing blue. His eyes were sparkling. A smile appeared on his lips, and even a light smoke appeared above his head. I wondered if the monster would be able to heal itself if it erased the ground it stood on. An attentive gaze followed every action and applied a spell that destroyed space. This is what a strong hero is capable of. But he noticed that he was still alive and smiled. Everyone also put their hands in their pockets, laughing, considering that they were too big for a person, and lowered their head down. She appeared behind Jerry, although this was the right end for Michael. But she still could not allow him to die. She put a dagger to his throat. The technique allowed him to use spatial magic without any range limitations. But it was not ideal either. It sucked out a lot of power. The man quickly got tired, because a lot of energy was spent on maintaining the dream realm. The other mages couldn't hold it for more than a few minutes. They were running out of energy. But the hero of the country is different. He has an insane supply of mana, which allows him to overcome this limitation. So this character is known as #1 in the country, but he had a weakness. The guy can only use his ability at a safe distance. If someone gets too close, the distortion can have the opposite effect, harming him if he allows someone to get close to him. He always remains on guard and does not let the enemy get close to him. But somehow, Jerry slipped through and ended up in his safe zone. It wasn't even that the man couldn't feel her. He simply forgot that she was there. He looked at the knife in surprise, thought how easily he had managed to slip past his heightened perception, and was amazed at the technique. When the man asked about her nation, she was surprised, smiled. The girl was impressed that she knew. He glanced sideways at the girl and winked at her. He knows about her race because he was involved in her death. 20 years ago, the race invaded the Earth and started a full-scale war. The people of her nation changed the Earth. A large team of 5 people, including him, exterminated them. They were heroes. At least, he was sure that no one survived. He continued to talk about how seeing any of them alive was a huge shock, and the only thing that was confusing was working for Michael. She stopped, froze. even slightly pulled away from the guy. Her lips pressed into a narrow line. Red eyes flashed. The girls laughed, not understanding why they needed to take revenge for a bunch of weaklings who couldn't even win the fight. It was all because she was bored. She just wanted fun, chaos, blood, a world where the fighting would never stop. A world filled with screams, where people tore each other apart. That was her ideal picture. Also continuing to hold the dagger near her throat, she asked about the fun. The boy laughed now. A typical representative of his nation decided. For this reason, she couldn't let the manager be killed, because the fun would be over. And her boss had big plans for him. He glanced sideways in surprise, asked about the leader who presumably died long ago. But Jerry did not give a full answer. As much as he had hoped, he was unable to obtain more information. He grinned because behind him, Jack was already taking action to protect him and defeat Jerry. He chuckled. If his skill couldn't handle her, it didn't mean he couldn't use it on others. Jack used his spell, the Blade of Aura, and cut the dream realm to a great depth, landed, and looked around. A guy appeared and started scolding Jack for the fact that he could have cut him in half. But he didn't hold back. He knew he could dodge it. The main character looked at the destruction and could not believe that he had destroyed such a huge piece of his kingdom. The wind control was impressive. He assumed that he could even fight with Dawn. Now he understands why the chief was interested in this boy, remembering their conversation, how he praised him for finding the element of a child prodigy. Jack turned his attention to himself. Dean looked at him with interest and asked again. Unable to finish off Jerry, she stood up and now stood and looked at the men, who in turn looked at her carefully. She was still holding a sharp dagger and smiling, grinning from under her forehead while looking at the guys. The hero knew that this nation was hard to kill. The girl in turn became embarrassed. A blush lit up her cheeks. She fell in love again, as it seemed to her, with the character. The men covered themselves with their hands from the dust. It was a spatial rift. Jack's last attack was too strong, so the space is now unstable, Dean explained. Jack's eye flashed. He couldn't let them get away so easily and rushed to attack. He was stopped by a young man. Now everything is absolutely useless. If they are not careful, the crack can suck them in. Then Dean looked at the girl again and saw that she also knew how exactly his dream kingdom worked. He was surprised by this, because two people really know magic well. Dawn and the one he thought was dead. The leader of the nation, which included the girl, was considered dead. But apparently this was not so. She said goodbye to the men, promised to meet them again, left them, and disappeared on the spot. The main character turned his head. She was right here, he noticed with annoyance. But they let her slip away. The guy next to him reassured him. He tilted his head slightly. They received important information today. Since she survived, they thought that they were all destroyed. Apparently he has teamed up with Michael and is planning to turn the world into chaos again. If they attack, it won't be limited to the country. The whole world will become a battlefield. Dean began to draw his spell, putting away Jack's sword, clarified that he heard what they were talking about, and asked again. The young man stuck out the tip of his tongue and egged the boy on, saying that he needed to prick up his ears. He turned to him, holding tightly to his staff, and said that they were heading back to the city. They couldn't do anything now anyway. Jack immediately cried out, because they couldn't just walk away and leave Camilla and Ben. The man decided that he would send reinforcements, no question about it. And the guy followed him, cried out in surprise, already penetrating into the transparent space. Together they rushed along some portal created by Dean. On the way, he might feel a little nauseous. The boy tried to clamp his mouth with his sword, holding back the urge to vomit. He thought with embarrassment that he should have warned about this in advance. But then his analysis became active and his eye lit up with a blue glow. The probability of meeting someone was high. At this time, the night city was quiet, and the only signs of chaos were the scattered corpses of animals and people and broken cars. Behind one of these cars, a dark figure was hiding. The monster was heading towards him with its tongue hanging out. It was Channing. He was hiding. He couldn't believe what was happening. He was shaking. He had no idea where these monsters came from. He looked at the phone in his hand, tormented by anxiety, wondering the reason for Camilla and Jack's silence. Finally, the phone rang. A girl was calling, drenched in sweat, A guy was asking about his share. I anxiously asked her for a couple of details, but I couldn't understand what was going on at all. Camila screamed into the phone, nervously pressing her hand to her chest. That monsters had attacked the city. They were already on civilian territory. This shocked her. The girl gave him the order to find a safe place. And suddenly, it seemed like it started to rain. The boy froze, slowly raised his head and saw the open mouth of a monster above him. He crawled away screaming. While he was gone, the country went mad. The voice on the telephone receiver did not stop. Suddenly, I saw a stranger in profile who was taking off his hat and was in no hurry to turn around. It was a research fellow from the Institute for Monster Research, who asked with a smile for permission to use the phone. The guys arrived, looked around. Jack was feeling sick. He was nauseous. He could barely hold back the urge to vomit. Unable to bear it, he fell to his knees. The boy was vomiting. Dean didn't believe it. It couldn't have been that bad. He turned to look at the guy, saliva dripping from his open mouth. It seemed to him that all his organs had done a backflip. He suddenly froze. Something caught his attention. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. Rising to his knees, he looked around the place. Didn't recognize it. So he asked Dean where they had arrived. He looked at the guy, hesitated, and replied that, thanks to Michael, this city was now in ruins. Jack stood up, clenched his teeth in rage, his forehead furrowed, and the veins on his neck bulged. Veins appeared. He did not understand the reason why this had to be done. The hero completely agreed with the boy. He didn't think that the damage would be so serious. There was a high probability that they would encounter monsters that were still at large. Then he turned to Jack, looked, and said that the Association of Heroes was destroyed, and that he would have to go to the Bone Guild to meet with Don. In addition to meeting Don, the guy also needs to keep an eye on who this unexpected figure from his analysis turns out to be. Suddenly, they saw someone's figure, who said that he had saved them from unnecessary troubles, and they turned towards the voice. It was the head of the guild, Cost. He rubbed his neck with his hand, and with a smile he noticed that the secretary had already told everything. The man then turned to look at the people behind him. But he wasn't the only one waiting for the boys. The heads of the guild stood there, a man and a woman. The girl asked about Jack with a smile, and the man folded his arms across his chest and noted with displeasure that they had been absent for too long. Dean was delighted, smiled barely noticeably. Now he wouldn't have to search and tell everything all over again to all the heads. The young man was amazed. The best of them were standing in front of him. They had all gathered together. Suddenly, Jenny ran to him, worried about his well-being. But seeing the living guy, she calmed down. But then she again anxiously leaned forward towards the guy and asked about Ben and his team. Jack lowered his head, darkened, apologized. They came there late. Only the leader remained alive. The rest were dead. He continued that he was seriously injured, was in critical condition. The members of the Red Hall Guild were working on his return. From what she heard, the girl screamed and put her hand to her lips. Don also put on a serious expression. His glasses flashed, leaned over, frowned, and asked Dean to tell him everything in detail. Dean scratched the back of his head, looked away, apologized. He didn't manage to arrive in time to save the guild members, weak, but consolation that the death was not in vain. He also shared information that made everyone hang their heads and become distrustful that the nation they thought they had won was alive. The one with whom the boy fought today confirmed that Ruiz was alive. Don's face darkened. He clenched his teeth. The head of the Warriors Guild couldn't stand it and shouted that it was impossible. They got rid of those bastards with their own hands 10 years ago. He clicked his tongue, closed his eyes, argued how he could be calm when there was such news, and discontentedly accused them of weakness. Don turned to the guy. He understood better what he was saying since he had seen everything with his own eyes. Jack turned his head, not understanding what was going on and why the hell the heads were talking to each other like that. While the young man was at a loss to guess what his analysis meant, another guild approached from the side. The black-haired man stepped forward, exclaiming in surprise that the heads of the 6 best guilds had united. The girl with pink hair leaned over. Their work was done. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The leader put her in her place, saying that it was not worth looking pathetic in front of first-rank heroes. It was not in keeping with her status. Then the man with red hair turned away from her, frowned. Nothing like that would happen. They needed to show what their guild was capable of, because he was trying to surpass them. Turning around and straightening up, the girl thought he was joking. All the other members of the guild also looked at the leader with doubt. Everyone thought about his words and thought they were stupid. Even the newbie who had just joined the guild was already thinking about asking to be transferred to another team. The guys suddenly noticed a man who was next to the heads of the strongest guild. They saw Jack. He spoke calmly and freely, standing next to the strongest. The girl also noticed and recognized this boy. The man confirmed that he looked different. At first, they didn't even recognize him. Guildmaster Keros was angry. He didn't understand what this boy was doing with first-class heroes. I immediately remembered the words when he sat behind the defeated monsters and sent Jack away from his team. It was then that he felt that very rage, raised his head and said that this was the order of the head of the guild. All the teams agreed that it was better to leave Jack. Lowering his head, he continued to say that it would be better there, and that there was no need to hate him for it, because the level of difficulty of the monster territory was getting higher and higher. The guy didn't fall for it and wanted to hear the truth. The man didn't stop him and said that he was just a useless piece of shit. The leader put his hand forward. He didn't like the fact that he was ignoring his orders. He was telling the boy a lot, and he was listening silently. After Jack turned around and left, it started to rain. Thanked for the sincerity and honesty, agreeing with his dismissal. A voice stopped him, demanding that he say something before leaving. The boy adjusted his glasses, took them off. He flashed his eye, turning to his former boss and said that he would never reach first rank no matter how hard he tried. These words still sounded for the man, and now the veins on his neck swelled with rage. His eyes sparkled with blood. Then at that moment, the hatred towards Jack became very strong. He could not stand any pity towards himself. Behind the Keros Guild, two people appeared. A man who was rolling a suitcase, and a guy who put his hand to his forehead in an attempt to see something. Jack's ability instantly activated, and his eye gleamed, looking for a possibility. The man with gray hair and glasses smiled softly and looked for the young man to talk to. People in suits and with weapons in their hands walked around the room, examining it carefully. A little later, they saw a man lying without one arm, and a command was received about a target found. They gave the go-ahead to take him under protection, he chuckled. They knew about the girl. They were discussing the woman who should be here, while Camilla was hiding behind the wall, preparing for an attack. Suddenly, they were engulfed in purple lines, trapped. One of them tried to calm the people down, recognizing the spell as only a weak binding spell. They were wearing armor, so it wouldn't hit them. Camilla didn't keep them waiting long. She came forward to the people, put her staff in front of her, and demanded an explanation. She froze as one of them called her by her full name, and now her mouth opened in confusion. The female voice continued to say that she never thought that she would be the target of salvation. The world is small, she joked. She took off her mask. The girl reminded her of her name. They studied together, at the Academy of Heroes. The Keros Guild members were looking around the place. The man who was looking for Jack stood there in confusion. He glanced at him, asked about his identity, and began to answer in a friendly manner. But with every word the guild leader said, he began to get worked up. He thought, raised his hand to his chin, saw the aggressiveness of the man standing in front of him. But he had nothing to prove. Channing spoke up, waving his hands. He put his hand on his chest from the Monster Cleaning Company and told about cooperation with the Fun Guild. The girl with pink hair raised her hands to her mouth in delight. She recognized the man. The black-haired man asked the girl with interest who was in front of them, turned around and nodded, because he was a legend among magicians. Jan was the one who led them to victory in the devastating war, later became a pioneer in the study of monsters and laid the foundation for all current research. Every mage knows his name. He smiled. Some details were slightly exaggerated, but otherwise it was all true. The girl bowed, shouting about her fanaticism. The newcomer smiled, a strong argument to believe this man, and glanced sideways at the head. His face darkened, his aura thickened. He didn't understand what kind of business a brat and a great warrior could have. Dean found himself next to Hunter, thoughtfully talking about his cold, dead gaze. There will be more wrinkles. The head of the guild clenched his teeth and stepped back. He didn't expect the hero to appear. He didn't notice him at all until he appeared next to him. The young man folded his arms across his chest, wondering who was watching them. But now he saw the little heroes. He glanced around at those present, noticed Jan, and addressed him, emphasizing his warm attitude with his voice. The man smiled slightly, greeted him in return, praised his appearance, and was not affected by old age. The smile became wider. He told about his family affairs, hoped for understanding, shared about an important event, the anniversary of the death of a dearly beloved woman. A second later, the guy was next to Jan, put his arm around his shoulders and expressed his displeasure. Hunter's team stared at this in shock, and Dean continued, offering the man a drink together after everything. Channing heard a familiar voice, raised his head and looked carefully. He joyfully ran to Jack, recognized him, as if many years had passed and they saw each other again. The character saw an old acquaintance. Hunter heard the speech addressed to him and frowned. The grinding of teeth was heard by everyone. The others were here too, the hero noticed, and realized that they were fighting monsters in the city. The guy approached the head of the guild, clutching a sword in his hand, marching in step, and began a friendly conversation with Hunter, but looked at him carefully. But in response, he received quite a lot of rudeness. The head called the boy a worthless person. He was offended that he stood and spoke as if they were equals. He even brought up the six best. The aura thickened. The words became more and more offensive. The man saw that he was trying to cling to any first-rank hero, hoping for the remnants. His eyes oozed with arrogance, and his words with poison. After listening to all this nonsense from the head, he calmly noted that he did not see any changes. The man remained a self-confident child, only causing trouble for his team. He also reminded me of his futile attempts to get a higher rank. He couldn't stand such words. He put his hand forward. He went completely mad with rage. He was about to pounce. Don appeared behind Hunter and swung his hand at him. He couldn't stand such impudence. He slammed the head of the leader into the ground with his hand. His body trembled. The man himself did not expect it to turn out so strong. Although he held back. The guys were leaving. Don looked back, spitting out words about how he had offended such a worthless person. Jack sincerely thanked him. Hunter's hand flew up and touched his face. He howled, not understanding why they were looking at him like he was a bug. He promised to pay back for the humiliation he had just experienced. The young people walked on. The girl joyfully greeted Jan. The man responded warmly. They brought back memories of old times. He remembered them as newcomers. Don put the old man in his place. Now was not the time for sentimentality, he echoed him, agreeing. Calmly spoke about the appearance of that nation. The head of the guild Cost was confused and surprised by the statement. The other heads were convinced of the race's appearance. Dean cried out, hurt that he was not believed from the very beginning. Suddenly Jan's gaze stopped on our character, correctly singling him out from everyone else. The young man was convinced that this was the person who was supposed to meet him, Camilla's father, and wondered about the reason. The girl was able to briefly brief her father on the situation. He thanked her for working with Michael. Jan's look became determined. He wanted to discuss something else with the guy, but it could wait. They should get down to business. After the man's words about isolating Camilla and Jack from this matter, the boy cried out in confusion. Bowing his head, the old man explained to the hero that the nation was seeking to take possession of the Sylph. Hearing this, the guy was completely confused and opened his mouth from what he heard. What he received now needs to be protected and cherished. In the helicopter, the girl calmed Camilla down, advised her to relax and prepare for landing. The heroine's huge blue eyes reflected concern, but she stubbornly pursed her lips and forced herself to calm down. When the helicopter landed and the girls stepped onto the ground, Camilla looked around and couldn't believe that she had returned to her city. The girl reported on the civilians and their evacuation. The bulk of the monsters were driven back. She turned around, closed her eyes, put her hand to her chest, exhaled, and worried about people. Suddenly there was laughter. It was the hero, covering her face with her palm, trying to hold back her laughter, but in vain. She looked at Camilla, waiting for an explanation. She apologized. She couldn't hold back. The girl continues to worry about everyone else except herself. Although she was the one in greatest danger, she was embarrassed. Tried to blame it all on the fact that she was a hero. There would always be anxiety. She didn't see anything funny in it. Having calmed down, I was finally able to look straight ahead, and without mockery, I had always appreciated this in her since my student days. She looked to the side, announced that someone clearly wanted to meet her, and turned around. The girl saw her father, cried out joyfully, and he greeted her warmly. While he was speaking, Camilla ran to her dad, praised her hair, became like her mother, flew into his arms. The old man staggered. His voice trembled from the overwhelming emotions. He closed his eyes, lowered his head. His melancholy was stronger. Stroked his head. Don and Dean watched this meeting. A slight smile touched his lips. This is how the chaos of this day ended, where in the end there was a meeting of two hearts, father and daughter. The next day, more heroes were sent to clear the city of monsters. Members of Michael's organization were captured and arrested to determine the circumstances of their guilt. But the leader escaped, and so the case stalled. Unfortunately, the Hero Association was also held accountable, and the guild leaders had to hold a meeting to present evidence. They accused him, demanded to explain where the heroes who were supposed to protect the population were. They hoped that there was no connection between him and Michael. The man was seething with rage, cursed. The city was saved, and they are still being blamed. Everything else was kept secret. The primary task was to restore the city. The guards put out their hand and let the guys go with a smile. Jack thanked them, tired. He and Camilla could barely stand on their feet, but they had done a good job. Part of the investigation was interrogating the boys. They repeated the same thing for 9 hours and now dreamed only of a bed. I looked at the girl, with circles under her eyes. She wanted only to take a bath and fall on the bed. But ahead they saw a man waving his hand. The house can wait, Jack decided. The girl stood with her hand on her chest. Today she came here with her father. The man, his voice trembling with excitement, touched her with his hand and apologized for being late. Jan began to tell, praising their common daughter, everything that had tormented him for a long time. The girl's body trembled. She was overcome with emotions that she could not contain from the words she heard. Her face darkened. Without raising her head, she moved sideways towards the toilet. And her father understood everything. As soon as Camilla disappeared around the corner, Jan exhaled, remained standing, chuckled and closed his eyes, as if gathering the strength to open them again. He admitted that whenever they visited his mother, the girl would go to the toilet to cry alone, despite the fact that 10 years had passed since Erna left them. He touched his forehead to the tree, exhausted, grieving for his heart, which ached for his daughter. But he could not let go of his beloved. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His forehead was cut with wrinkles. Unbearable pain shone through his eyes. He asked questions that had no answers. The male figure froze near the columbarium. He had no strength to forgive his wife for leaving him. Jack lay down on the sofa in the guild office, put his hand on his head, exhaled. Now he could rest. He opened his eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. So many things had happened during the day. Thoughts were feverishly spinning in his head. He was sad that he had let the villains escape right from under his nose. But he was glad that Sylph had awakened and would now be able to use more power. I remembered Jan's words. They chose the guys for their hunt. And I understood that I had to try even harder. He also told the boy about his beloved woman, who was killed by the leader of the race, tried to steal Erna's powers. Then they were able to stop him. But now it's happening again. The realization made the boy jump. This is not something that will simply disappear if they avoid it. They will definitely cross paths with the killer of Camilla's mother. You need to become strong. Just like Don and Dean chose his idols. Suddenly, the boy perked up, glanced sideways at the door. All his instincts were simply screaming. The eye lit up blue. The hand itself reached for the scabbard to pull out the sword. He heard a voice. A female figure with long dark hair appeared in the doorway. She calmly walked towards Jack. Mickey beamed with a smile, greeted the hero, and complained that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was getting dark. Channing walked, clutching the strap of his bag and thinking, his head down. People were hurrying about their business. Suddenly he heard fragments of sentences. He raised his head and looked carefully, trying to make out what was being said. Two boys were looking at the phone, discussing something furiously and screaming. They started talking about the hero they had recently seen at the bus stop, and were surprised by his popularity and communication with the strongest. Channing understood who they were talking about, immediately approached the guys, smiled. Since they were talking about an autograph, He wouldn't give one without his permission. After the monster attack, footage of Jack next to the first-rank heroes spreads at lightning speed. There was a lot of hype around the new hero. Everyone was waiting for him to show up. The guy grinned. It was just beginning. A smile appeared on his lips. The boy was sure that the Fun Guild would succeed. Camilla and Jack had advanced far. Until that day of glory arrives, Channing will be the representative. We'll be there to support them on this difficult path. Approaching the door, thoughts were occupied with the upcoming affairs. I had almost opened the door, but I heard a female voice and froze like a shadow in the doorway. I recognized the girl. It was the head of the guild, Snowflake. I listened to their conversation. Jack warmly welcomed the guest. It was not worth coming. There is a phone, he reminded. Channing seemed to hold his breath, not understanding what she was doing there, his thoughts racing. Meanwhile, the girl finally gave an answer to the guy's proposal, and now she is here in person to announce her decision. The young man behind the door decided that they were on a date and declaring their love. Everything pointed to this, and there was no doubt that Mickey and Jack were now together. He covered his mouth from the excess of emotions. Love flourishes even during war. He was a little jealous. Tears rolled from his eyes. Jack continued the conversation and had no idea what was going on behind the door, and suggested that the girls study the contract with Camilla. He felt relieved, because if a hero of such a level joins them, it would be great. The girl turned her head in search of her animal. The door swung open and Channing came slamming into the room, falling to the floor with a small chinchilla sitting on his neck. His whole body was shaking, and the animal grabbed his cheek with its small paws and did not let go. She folded her hands together. Mika was worried about the chinchilla. She thought that it had run away. She asked to let the boy go. Jack turned his gaze to her in surprise. Now the one who was actively gnawing the boy's ear was that healthy creature. The hero could not believe it. He compared the animals. Camila was driving to her office when she received a phone call and some great news. Together with his father, they drove from their mother, fully agreeing with the guy's decision. The girl would be a great addition to the team. Jan, without taking his eyes off the road, showed interest in the very same tamer who was now on the team. Once again, he reminded her of her mother. The girl became embarrassed, raised her hand to her hair, and tried to argue about her unpopular guild. She raised her head, reminded her father of Erna's place. She always dreamed of a large guild with the head of another race. She was ready to do everything so that her mother's mast would come true no matter what it cost her. Later, a man in the office of the Fun Guild introduced himself to Mika, extending his hand in greeting. She happily accepted the greeting and introduced herself in a friendly manner as a new member of the guild. He assessed the girl's hands, made an analysis in his head, and decided that she was undoubtedly an experienced hero, judging by the calluses on her hands. Not only a tamer, but also an experienced archer. He asked to look after his daughter. It became awkward for both Jack and Camilla. The guy even got the feeling that his father was talking about work. The young man understood why he was so careful, because Camilla could become a target of that nation. So his checking of the new guild member made sense. He turned his gaze to the animal, asked about the chinchilla. The girl bent over and replied that it was so. In fact, it was in its reduced form, and it still did not tear itself away from the shaking Channing, who was trying to tear it off his head. I was very surprised that the animal could change its size at will, and looked thoughtfully at the long-eared one. When he heard that the animal could reach 3 meters, he was even more amazed and reached out his hand to the growling chinchilla. I wanted to take a sample of the fur. It could be a valuable addition to the study. But the chinchilla growled menacingly, opening its small mouth. Mika decided to give the sample later. Lightly touching the man's hand and removing it, explained that she was not the most affectionate animal, especially when it came to strangers. Finally, Camilla got in the way. She felt awkward, asked not to interfere, and sent her out, pushing her father in the back. The girl continued to look with a thoughtful look. The chinchilla in her arms was still restless. There was another unknown reason why Sheila was so wary of people. In a dark room, under the supervision of other people, a beast-like man walked slowly. The president greeted Isak without turning to him, but his back was tense, and asked about the purpose of the visit. I sent Rios to make sure that everything was going according to the original instructions. In the flask, which was connected to the high control, A male figure was floating in a purple liquid. Being inside this strange flask could not stand it. The man broke the glass, and now droplets of purple liquid were rolling off it. He squinted his purple eyes when he heard the voice that greeted him cheerfully. Jerry walked slowly, her hands behind her back. A slight smile, like a big grin, appeared on her lips. She admitted, chewing a candy in her mouth, that she was bored while she waited for him for 3 days. The young man, realizing that the plan had failed if he came back to life, raised his hand into the air, from which liquid continued to drip. The girl leaned forward a little and replied with a smile that the previous one was dead, and now a new one has appeared. Still, the young man did not understand why he was resurrected until he heard a voice that came from the side that it was his order. Ruiz walked with his white eyes sparkling and admitted that it would be a shame to lose such a person. He was still standing there and didn't understand when the girl lowered her head and flew like a bullet towards the boss. She ran to the boss, opening her arms wide. A slight blush appeared on her cheeks. She missed him very much. He shook his head, put his hands in his pockets, and the girl spread out next to him. He noticed that they had only seen each other yesterday. There was no need to show such emotions and pretend that she was happy. Rising to her knees, the girl looked at him. In her defense, she said that she couldn't help herself, while Michael dropped to one knee and apologized for letting her down. Together with the girl, he approached him. He already knew everything because Jerry kept him up to date. In the end, it was quite difficult to cope with first-rank heroes, he summed up. I even heard that the spirit of the wind found its owner. Michael looked down and did not know what to answer to this. The beast-like man looked down and demanded to know more about Jack. At this time, Jan said goodbye to his daughter. His next starting point was Japan. The girl squeezed her hand near her chest with a sad look. She asked her father that she would like to walk him to the airport. He left the guys at ease because they now had a reliable guild member. Suddenly, Camilla screamed. Her desire was to show the spirit of her dead mother to her father before leaving. Jack raised his hand, looked. He tried to summon the spirit but failed. Everyone was surprised. Opening the car door, the man assumed that the spirit was simply tired and would definitely show up next time. Reminded Jack of his request last time. The guy bowed his head and nodded in agreement. Still getting Jan into his car, he knew he would have to collide, but at least he had to avoid it as much as possible. When the time comes, it is imperative to protect Camilla. These were the last words spoken by the father. The guys remained standing near their office and watched as the car drove out. The man gripped the steering wheel tightly, and wrinkles cut into his forehead. He was thoughtful. Jan's eyes flashed blue. No matter how hard everyone tried to avoid it, fate would still find them. Camilla turned to the guy, folded her arms across her chest, and narrowed her eyes in displeasure. She was interested in the conversation with her father. She put her hands on her hips and advanced on the boy. Not believing that this was a simple conversation, it sounded quite suspicious. The guy thought that it was worth keeping the events of 10 years ago a secret from Camilla, but she demanded that they be revealed. Turning around, he threw her a farewell that there was nothing like that there. In any case, it was necessary to finish. Camilla screamed and extended her hand. I asked if he was free to go into the bank. He turned around in surprise, looked, and was interested in this news. The young man was greeted very warmly. Bank employees were already waiting for him and seeing him off. The guy had a gold card in his hands. He looked at it with his mouth open in surprise. But when he was a member of Kiro's, he couldn't even dream of such a thing. There was a corporate card issued by the government for the needs of the guild. The government partially pays for the needs of the guild. It is incredibly difficult to get one of them. I raised the card up. It shone beautifully. People who met the man wondered. They saw his sword and understood that he was a hero. He was sad and looked at his sword. He shouldn't have taken it with him. It would attract the attention of ordinary people. He corrected himself. You never know when and where enemies might appear, like during an invasion of the city. So now he was walking down the street with a ball in his hands. Everything seemed peaceful. But the feeling that the showdown with Michael was a dream continued to be felt. This gap between the heroes and the peaceful people was irritating, while the latter thought it was a fun pastime. Suddenly, the guy collided with someone. His intuition screamed and he jerked in fear. I turned to him, apologized, got distracted for a minute. That strange guy didn't even turn around. He understood that the beast-like one was surprised that he was just walking around among people, and he exhaled, calming down. It was Ruiz. His eyes narrowed, the dark aura thickened. He found the one he was looking for. Here his eye lit up blue again, and he returned to experience a strange feeling. Such a feeling came from Jerry. Turning around, the guy tried to find that beast-like creature again, but he didn't see anyone anymore. He had disappeared. He turned around again, now confused, wondering if it could have been his imagination, or if he was imagining things, and a drop of sweat rolled down his face. I was drawn to a loud scream from a woman about having to pay before eating. The guy raised his head. His red eyes flashed. He waved his hands. He had no money. The woman jumped up, grabbed his chest, called the man shameless, got angry and tore his t-shirt. Everyone around was whispering, covering themselves with their hands, and only Jack paid attention to this. He stood and watched. I didn't understand whether I should intervene and help. I asked what was going on because I was just passing by. Suddenly his ability worked. His eyes glowed blue. The boy was conducting an analysis. The creature was upset that such a fuss had been raised because of the cucumber. The woman was adamant and was going to call the police. Then she left him no choice. His face turned into a fanged muzzle. The unfortunate woman screamed in horror. Her fate was sealed. And in fact, he bit off her head. Blood spurted in all directions, raised his fanged mouth and smacked his lips with pleasure. Jack rushed forward, drawing his sword from its sheath, ordering the men to get away from here. In front of them was a beast-like being, a man running towards his goal, and people fleeing. He scratches his tongue contentedly with his clawed paw and turns to look at his next victim. The guy had already pulled out his sword and rushed to attack. Cases of animal attacks had become rare lately, but today showed that this was not the case. The boy's analysis convinced him that there was a possibility of defeating the beast-like creature, and he rushed into the attack. Our hero's sword and the beast's clawed paws clashed. A red light spilled out, and the clanging and ringing was loud. The monster pounced, swiped its paw, and the guy got a wound on his cheek. Blood started pouring out. He didn't pay attention to it. The blue eye glowed. Jack passed his hand, and the beast found itself below, swung to strike. A sharp turn, and the monster grabbed the sword with its fangs, easily holding it, unable to call upon the elements to help. He attacked weakly. The guy himself understood this. The beast-like one also noticed and did not remain silent. He mocked. He grabbed the weapon tighter with both hands. He couldn't hold out like this for long, although the analysis still showed a high probability of victory. The monster felt the weight. It was not so easy to hold the blade. It was pulling, and very soon his strength left him. With a swing, the guy managed to throw the monster away. He put all his strength into it. He braked, clawing at the asphalt with his sharp claws. A grin appeared on his face. A terrible sight. I looked at my sword and was glad. It was scratched and not broken as expected. A sword created by a great warrior has excellent characteristics. The problem was that he couldn't use elemental magic. Fighting with firepower like before was not possible, but the probability of victory was still high. A good outcome. There is a chance of getting seriously injured. Ideally, he needs to buy time for the arrival of other heroes. The monster noticed that the guy was distracted and waved his paw. It bothered him that he wasn't even looking at him. The guy tried to distract the monster, so he started a conversation with him about killing someone. He became furious, became angry. His yellow eyes flashed. His clawed paw flew up. He killed for pleasure, the creature said. Hearing the answer, the boy clenched his teeth tightly. His eye blazed blue. His face changed. He rushed to attack. The strategy to win. Time is canceled. The monster and Jack clashed again. One wielding a sword, the other brandishing his claws. I saw his attack paths clearly. The beast-like one noticed this too, grinned and decided something. Jack recoiled, changed trajectory just before the blow, gritted his teeth, couldn't read such attacks. He lowered his hand from which blood was flowing. If he could only use elemental magic, he would easily kill him. Again, the monster rushed at the guy, shouting that he was the weak link, trying to hurt him with words. A female voice was heard. and I saw Mia jumping on the beast-like creature, striking it with blow after blow. The girl pressed the monster's head into the stone ground, and it began to straighten up. The creature looked forward at the guy with its yellow eyes and tried to make some kind of sound. The guy looked at his hand. There were scratches on it and was surprised by this. Mia also noticed his wound. She grabbed the muzzle, which was already covered in blood, and the monster began to apologize, mumble something, and beg for mercy. A barely noticeable smile flashed across his lips, and Jack immediately pressed his lips into a narrow strip, looking with all his eyes at the girl. She had not changed. The nickname Bloodthirsty Killer is still relevant. Mia put out her hand, which was covered in blood. Soon everything was unhooked, and the police were already working, carefully examining the monster that had been pressed into the ground. One of the policemen saluted the girl, praised her for her excellent work. They would clean everything up. It was not worth worrying about. Jack shouted at the girl. She turned to him and asked how he was feeling. He put his hand forward, said that he had a couple of scratches and that he had already received help, and asked why she was there and what was going on. The young man looked back at the crowd, which had already begun to talk among itself, and recognized the hero. He grabbed Mia by the hand and led her away. They should leave this place. She looked at the capture with embarrassment. Ruiz watched the entire proposal from above, discovered the intruder, and was only upset that he did not use magic. The leader of the guild, Cost, sat concentratedly at the table and officially announced the meeting. Guildmaster Quiros was indignant. He was a businessman and was attending a meeting of heroes for the first time. Dean touched his face with his hand, grinned, egged the man on, talking about the newcomers, but he himself was not visible. The boss pretended to be thinking, justified himself by an urgent meeting, and the guy laughed. They checked in the presence of everyone, but there was still one free seat. The heroes looked at the empty chair. There was another guy who was sent on a mission, but everyone thought he was detained there. Suddenly, the one everyone was waiting for appeared. He was in no hurry to join them, sipping liquid from a bottle, and greeted them. Having put the bottle away, he looked around at everyone, his face red and covered with stubble, and the head of the Fate Guild appeared.